the Shadow Sovereign of Quill. A solo leveling and high school DxD crossover. Act 1. The System Awakens. Where death ends and the hunt begins. Chapter 1. A corpse that would not stay dead. Co's Cemetery. 11:47 p.m. The rain fell in straight lines. It did not swirl or drift. It came down the way gravity intended, hard and indifferent, as though the sky had made a decision and saw no reason to reconsider. The cemetery on the eastern edge of Ko was empty of the living, and the headstones stood in their crooked rows like bad teeth, slick with water, offering nothing to the dark. Issei Hyoudou was in the ground. He had been there for 11 minutes. The wound that had put him there was clean. One puncture. Center mass. He had not felt the blade so much as felt the world go sideways, felt the air leave him in a single long syllable that was not quite a word and not quite a scream, felt his knees find the pavement of the park outside his school before he understood what was happening. The girl who had done it was gone by the time his vision dimmed. She had said something before she left. Something about contracts and obligations and how she was sorry, genuinely, but that this was how it had to be. He had not been buried in a coffin. Someone had dug a shallow depression in a corner of the cemetery, and covered him with loose earth, and the rain was already beginning to undo their work. His right arm was the first thing to move. It did not move because he decided to move it. It moved the way a door moves when pressure is applied from the other side. Something was pushing from within his chest, something hot and rhythmic and deeply irritated, and his arm lifted through the loose soil without his permission. Then his lungs filled. The cough that followed was spectacular. He came up through the earth coughing, dragging himself forward on hands and knees, and he knelt in the wet grass of the cemetery for a long time before he was willing to accept that he was breathing. The air tasted like copper and petrichor, and the specific flavor of having been very briefly and imperfectly dead. He sat back on his heels. He looked at his hands. Then the world went white. The notification appeared in the air in front of him the way a thought appears, without sound, without ceremony, rendered in pale blue light that had no visible source. It said, System integration complete. Host identified Issei Hyoudou. Biological status, revived. Level 1. Current rank F. Active quest, survive the night. He stared at it. He had spent enough time playing video games to recognize the architecture of what he was looking at. Status window. Character sheet. The particular blue-white glow of a menu that existed only for the user. He reached out and touched the edge of the notification, and it shifted, expanded, showed him a full grid of attributes. Strength 11. Agility 9. Intelligence 14. Sense 12. Vitality 18. Below the attributes, a single blinking prompt. First quest reward pending. Complete objective to unlock system core. He got to his feet. He was still in his school uniform. It was torn at the midsection where the blade had gone in, and the fabric was dark with drying blood, and the wound itself was closed. Not scarred, not healing. Closed. As though it had never opened. He looked at the cemetery around him. At the rain. At the headstones. At the shadow that was standing 30 meters away, watching him. It was shaped like a person, but it had no face. It stood where the lamplight ended and the darkness began, at the precise margin where the two territories met, and it did not move. It held something in one hand. Something long. The system generated a new notification. First quest, eliminate the gate fragment scout. Reward, level up X3. Shadow extraction unlocked. Issei exhaled through his nose. He had died. He had been buried. He had come back. And now the universe wanted him to fight something in a cemetery at midnight. He thought about all the ways this evening had gone differently than expected. Then he walked toward the shadow. The thing came at him fast. Faster than anything with legs should be able to move. It crossed 30 meters in the time it took Issei to register it had started moving, and the long blade in its hand carved a horizontal line through the air at throat height, and Issei ducked under it by instinct and muscle memory he did not technically have yet. The system spoke in the back of his mind. Combat data recording. He rolled left. The blade came down again, vertical this time, and bit into the cemetery path where he had been standing, throwing chips of wet stone. The shadow thing was not making any sound. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the blade and the absolute dark where its face should have been. Issei grabbed a headstone. Not in a thoughtful way. Not strategically. He grabbed it because it was there, and it was solid, and he needed something between himself and the blade. And when the next strike came, he caught it on the edge of the stone and felt the impact travel up through his wrists and into his shoulders and explode in a starburst of pain that told him, helpfully, that whatever this thing was made of, it was considerably harder than granite. The headstone cracked. System note: insufficient strength for direct blocking. Recommend evasion pattern delta. He did not know what evasion pattern delta was. He let go of the broken headstone and moved. He moved backward, sideways, diagonal, without any plan except to not be where the blade was, and as he moved the system fed him data in pale blue flickers at the edges of his vision. Strike trajectory. Predicted next position. A red outline around the shadow creature that pulsed brighter at the joints. The joints. He stopped moving away. He moved in. The shadow raised its blade and he went inside the arc of the swing, too close for the weapon to be useful, and he hit it with his elbow at the joint the system had highlighted, the place where the shoulder met the rest of the arm, and he felt something give. The shadow staggered. It was the first time it had staggered. Issei grabbed the wrist of its weapon hand with both of his, twisted the way he had seen people twist things on television when they wanted the weapon to fall, and the blade dropped into the wet grass. He picked it up. The shadow looked at him from where its face should have been. He swung. When it was over, the shadow was gone. Not fallen, not lying in the cemetery grass. Gone. As though it had never been there except for the blade in his hand and the deep cut in the cemetery path. The system loaded. First quest complete. Rewards processing. Level up. Level up. Level up. Current level 4. Shadow extraction, unlocked. New skill acquired, sense of the hunter. He stood in the rain with the blade in his hand and watched his own attributes update in real time. Strength jumping from 11 to 19. Agility moving from 9 to 16. Intelligence climbing steadily, settling at 22, then ticking upward one more digit as though reconsidering. He felt different. Not stronger in the way lifting something heavy makes you feel strong. Stronger in the way a machine feels strong, systematic and scalable, as though what had changed was not just the number but the architecture beneath it. He looked at the blade in his hand. He looked at the spot where the shadow had dissolved. A new prompt appeared. Shadow extraction available. Target, Gate Fragment Scout. Extract? He reached toward the spot. His hand passed through empty air once, twice, and then on the third pass his fingers found something cold and incorporeal and pulled. The shadow came out of the air like pulling a curtain through a keyhole. It unfolded, took shape, stood at roughly shoulder height with its head bowed and no face, and its hands at its sides. It was the thing that had tried to kill him 30 seconds ago, and now it was waiting for instructions. He stared at it. It stared at him with the place where its face would have been. Shadow Soldier created, designation pending. Awaiting host command. Issei thought about the girl who had killed him earlier in the evening. He thought about her expression when the blade went in. He thought about the words she had used, obligations. He thought about the system. About the fact that he had an army building itself in real time from the enemies he defeated. He thought about how thoroughly the evening had recalibrated his understanding of what his life was going to look like. He named the shadow Kage. Kage bowed. Issei walked out of the cemetery and into the rain. Behind him, Kage followed, silent, leaving no footprints. Chapter 2, What the System Knows. Ko Town. Day 2. He did not go to school. This was not a decision so much as an outcome. He had spent the night in his room, which his parents had not noticed him returning to because they were already in bed and his bedroom window faced the back garden. He had cleaned the blood from his uniform with the methodical efficiency of someone who had learned in the past 4 hours that the world was larger and stranger and more immediately dangerous than he had previously imagined, and then he had sat at his desk and opened the system. It was patient with him. It did not push. It simply existed as a menu in his field of vision, available when he looked for it, ignorable when he did not. He spent 2 hours reading every category, every subcategory, every notation it had for him, and when he was done he had a clear picture. The system was a framework for transformation. It catalogued enemies, it rewarded their defeat with experience and levels, it offered skills at certain thresholds, and it allowed something called shadow extraction, which permitted him to convert defeated enemies into soldiers loyal to no one but himself. There was a stat called intelligence that governed processing speed, tactical analysis, and what the system referred to as strategic depth. There was a note in small text at the bottom of the intelligence entry that read, "Host intelligence currently accelerating at non-standard rate. Anomaly flagged. Beneficial." He had read that note 4 times. He understood it to mean that whoever or whatever had designed the system had built it to make its host stronger, and that something about Issei Hyoudou specifically was making the intelligence track move faster than anticipated. He found this interesting. He had never, in 17 years of life, been called particularly intelligent. He was average in school. He was enthusiastic. He had good instincts for friendship, and bad instincts for caution. He had spent an embarrassing amount of his adolescent life developing a reputation that he now recognized, from the cooler vantage of this new morning, as being both unflattering and strategically useless. That version of himself had been killed last night. He was not being dramatic about this. He was being precise. The Issei who had left school yesterday afternoon was gone, in the cemetery, under the dirt. This version had come back with a system and 11 minutes of being dead inside him and a shadow soldier named Kage standing in the corner of his bedroom like a coat rack that could fight. He opened the quest log. There were 3 active quests. Quest 1, identify the agent of your death. Reward, Intelligence 5. New skill, Profile Lock. Quest 2, locate the nearest gate fragment. Reward, Rare Skill Chest. Level up X2. Quest 3, establish a Shadow Battalion, minimum 10 units. Reward, Shadow Monarch passive activated. He read them twice. Then he opened the system map, which overlaid on his normal vision in a faint blue tint when he activated it, and showed him Ko from above with small indicators marking points of interest. There was a red indicator 2 kilometers east of his house. There was a yellow indicator at Ko Academy. There was a white indicator at a Western-style mansion on the northern edge of town that the system labeled only with a single notation, Supernatural Entity Cluster. Power level, significant. Approach with calibration. He committed the map to memory. Then he made breakfast, because he had apparently been buried and revived and he was hungry, and being hungry was a problem he could solve. The red indicator led him to an abandoned textile warehouse on the industrial edge of Ko. He had taken Kage with him, which meant he had a shadow soldier walking several steps behind him through the streets of a town that could not see it. The system had explained this in its matter-of-fact way. Shadows were invisible to non-hosts and non-hunters unless Issei chose to manifest them in solid form. In their default state they existed in a phase slightly adjacent to the visible world, present and functional but imperceptible to civilians. He found this very convenient. The warehouse had been empty for years. The roof had sections missing and the floor was concrete that had begun to express its feelings about water damage through an elaborate system of cracks and subsidence. Light came in sideways through broken panels in the high walls, falling in geometric slabs across the floor. The gate fragment was in the center of the warehouse. He had expected something dramatic. He was not sure what, exactly. Something with presence. What he found was a hole, roughly 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide, hanging in the air above the cracked concrete as though someone had taken scissors to the fabric of the warehouse's interior space and made an incision. The edges were dark red and slightly luminous, and through the hole he could see something that was not the inside of any warehouse. Through the gate he could see stone corridors and the suggestion of firelight and movement. The system classified it, Gate Fragment Rank D, Entities within 14. Recommended minimum level 6. Host current level 4. He looked at the gate. He looked at the 2-level gap between his current status and the recommendation. He looked at Kage. The system added a moment later, Shadow soldiers do not consume host experience. Victory will credit host only. Risk assessment, elevated but acceptable. Additional note, host intelligence suggests you have already identified the optimal entry vector. He had. The gate entities would be moving in the stone corridors, which meant confined space, which meant their numbers advantage was reduced to however many could occupy a choke point at once. If he went in and immediately took the choke point position, he turned 14 enemies into a sequential problem rather than a simultaneous one. He commanded Kage to enter first. The gate entities were roughly humanoid, approximately 1.5 meters tall, with the kind of physique that suggested they had been built for function rather than aesthetics. They had dark gray skin and eyes that caught the firelight in a way that suggested light was not something they were comfortable with. They were also, Issei noted, substantially slower than the Shadow Scout from the cemetery. Kage took 3 of them in the first 15 seconds at the choke point, moving with a precision that seemed almost contemptuous, using the shadow blade that had materialized in its hands at his command. The remaining 11 reorganized with what looked like disciplined instinct, pulling back from the choke point and spreading into the wider cavern beyond. Issei followed Kage in. He moved differently than he had in the cemetery. In the cemetery he had been reactive, running on instinct and adrenaline and the basic mammalian desire to continue existing. Here he was working from data. The system fed him their positions in a faint overlay, showed him sight lines, flagged the 3 that carried ranged weapons made of something dark and bone-like, recommended he prioritize them. He prioritized them. He was not a trained fighter. He had established this fact clearly in the cemetery. But he did not need to be a trained fighter to be effective when he had an extraction soldier absorbing the close-range pressure, when he had an intelligence system feeding him real-time threat assessment, and when his strength attribute was sitting at 19 and climbing with every successful engagement. The 11th entity fell 16 minutes after he had entered the gate. He stood in the stone corridor with blood on his uniform that was not his own and listened to the silence settle. Quest 2 complete. Rare skill chest, incoming. Level up. Level up. Current level 7. The skill chest materialized in his hands as a small box of dark metal that opened when he touched it. Inside was a single glowing item, rendered in the system's visual language as a card with text he read carefully. Skill acquired, Ruler's Authority. Effect: Host may issue direct commands to shadow soldiers with 0 transmission latency. Commands execute at host intelligence speed. Passive bonus: all shadow soldiers within 200 m receive host intelligence as tactical overlay. He read this twice. He was now, functionally, a battlefield command system. He could issue orders at the speed of thought to soldiers who received those orders as tactical data, not as verbal instructions that required interpretation. He looked at the 10 new shadows available for extraction from the defeated entities around him. He extracted all 10. They rose around him in the firelit stone corridor, 10 soldiers with no faces and their heads bowed, waiting. Shadow extraction did not preserve the physical dimensions of the original. It translated the original's fighting capability and instincts into shadow form, scaled to a baseline that would grow alongside him as he leveled. He had 11 shadows now, including Kage. Quest 3 progress, 11 of 10 units. Quest complete. Shadow Monarch passive, activating. The activation of the Shadow Monarch passive was not subtle. He felt it arrive the way weather arrives, a pressure change and a shift in temperature, except the pressure was inside him and the temperature drop was not cold so much as it was clarity. Everything sharpened. The system's interface became crisper. His awareness of his 11 shadows became structural rather than perceptual, built into him the way the awareness of one's own hands is built in. He walked out of the gate with 11 shadows behind him. The gate closed when the last shadow crossed the threshold, folding in on itself and leaving nothing behind but a faint dark stain on the air that would likely be invisible to anyone who did not know to look for it. His phone said it was 2 in the afternoon. He had a quest remaining. He needed to identify the agent of his death. Chapter 3: The Girl with the Spear. Ko Academy. The next morning, he went back to school. This was strategic. The yellow indicator on the system map had been sitting at Ko Academy since he had first pulled up the overlay, and he had a working theory about what it indicated. The girl who had killed him had been wearing a Ko uniform. Ko Academy was large but not enormous. He could narrow the field. He also had Quest 1 active, which meant the system was going to reward him for finding her, And he was at the stage of this new life where reward accumulation was the primary operational priority. He sat through homeroom in a state of quiet, which was not a thing his classmates had previously associated with him. Matsuda and Motohama both looked at him with varying degrees of concern. He answered their questions with minimal information. He was fine. He had been sick yesterday. He was better now. He scanned the room. The system was helpfully tagging individuals with faint indicators as his sense attribute processed the population around him. Most of his classmates returned a flat gray tag, civilian. Baseline. 2 students in the back row generated something different, faint yellow tags that the system labeled enhanced. Species uncertain. He made notes. The yellow indicator at the school was not in a classroom. He located it at lunch, tracking through the system overlay, moving through the school's interior with a precision that he suspected would have looked strange to anyone watching him. It led him to the old building. The abandoned section behind the gymnasium that nobody used for anything credible. He pushed open the door at the end of the corridor. The room beyond was not a classroom. It had the bones of a classroom, the dimensions and the windows, but the furniture had been cleared and replaced with something that looked more like a drawing room in a European manner. All dark wood and high-backed chairs and a small table with a chess set that had been mid-game for what appeared to be some time. There were 2 girls in the room. One of them had long crimson hair and violet eyes and the composed expression of someone who had grown up in environments where composure was the minimum expectation. She was sitting in the largest chair as though it were a throne, which Issei suspected was not an accident. She looked up when he entered. The other one he recognized. She was standing near the window, and she had the same dark hair, and the same even features she had had in the park when she killed him, and she was looking at him with an expression that moved rapidly through surprise, guilt, and something that might have been relief before settling on a careful neutrality that did not quite manage to be convincing. The system tagged her immediately, reincarnated devil. Species devil. Rank queen. Affiliation, House Gremory. Relationship to host, direct cause of death, registered. It also added, helpfully, Quest 1 objective located. The crimson-haired girl spoke first. You found us, she said. It was not a question. Her voice had the quality of someone who was reassessing a situation in real time while maintaining the appearance of already having assessed it. That is unexpected. Your queen killed me the night before last, Issei said. He kept his voice level. He was discovering that the new architecture inside him, whatever the Shadow Monarch passive had built, was very good at keeping him level. I am here to understand why. The crimson-haired girl looked at her queen. Her queen had the good grace to look at the floor. Rias Gremory, the crimson-haired girl said, introducing herself. Heiress to the House of Gremory. And you are Issei Hyoudou, who was killed by my queen Akeno on the instruction of a fallen angel named Raynare, who had been surveilling you for reasons we did not fully understand at the time. Issei processed this. A fallen angel had me killed, he said. Yes. And your queen was the instrument. Rias Gremory looked at him without looking away. There was something admirable about it, the willingness to hold eye contact with a consequence. We believed you were a threat or an asset of the fallen angels. We were acting on incomplete information. We were wrong, and I am prepared to offer you compensation appropriate to that error. She said it the way someone says a sentence they have rehearsed, except that her eyes were doing something more complicated than the sentence. Something that suggested the offer was genuine even if the delivery was practiced. He looked at the girl called Akeno. She had still not looked up from the floor. He thought about the night in the cemetery. About coming up through the dirt in the rain. About 11 minutes of being dead. He was not angry. He examined this carefully and confirmed it. He was not angry. What he was interested. Because a fallen angel had ordered his death, which meant there was a reason, which meant he had already been a factor in someone's calculation before he had any idea there were calculations being made. And a devil heiress was offering him compensation, which meant he had value to her beyond what had just happened. He pulled up the system in his peripheral vision. Quest 1 complete. Intelligence 5. Profile lock acquired. Current intelligence, 31. 31 intelligence. Whatever the system's intelligence stat governed, 31 was nearly 3 times what he had started with yesterday, and he could feel the difference as a qualitative change in how fast and cleanly he was moving through the room's information. He sat down in one of the chairs without being invited to. "Tell me about the fallen angels," he said. "Tell me about Raynare specifically. And tell me what you are offering and why you think it is worth my accepting." Rias Gremory looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not immediately read. Then something shifted at the edges of it, something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent. "You are not what I expected," she said. "I have heard that recently," he replied. "Please continue." The history of Ko Town, as Rias Gremory explained it, was a history of layered occupation. The town sat at a convergence point. Supernatural convergence, the kind that was invisible to civilians but apparent to anyone with the relevant sensory equipment. 3 factions had interests in this convergence: the Devils, represented primarily by the Gremory and Citri peerage houses based at Ko Academy; the Fallen Angels, who had been running operations through the area for the past 18 months. And a third category Rias referred to simply as gate entities, which Issei recognized from his warehouse excursion. Gates, she explained, were not random. They opened at convergence points. The fallen angels were studying them. The devils were managing them. And someone or something was increasing their frequency, which was why both factions were in Ko and why the tension between them had been escalating. Raynare, she said, was a lieutenant of the fallen angels' local operation. Efficient, cold, and characterized by a habit of eliminating perceived complications before they became actual complications. Issei had been a perceived complication. "Because of the sacred gear," Rias said, watching him carefully as she said it. "You carry one." "We detected it." Raynare detected it. "The difference is that she decided to act on the detection before we did." He had not known he had a sacred gear. He pulled up the system and found the notation he had initially glossed over in the equipment section: sacred gear detected. Boosted gear. Status dormant. System integration pending. He looked at his left arm. Nothing visible. But when he focused, there was a warmth there that had not been there before, or perhaps had always been there, and he had not known what it was. "What does it do?" he asked. "It doubles your power," Rias said, "at set intervals. Indefinitely. It is one of the rarest and most powerful sacred gears in existence." He thought about this in the context of a system that already made him stronger with every enemy he defeated. He thought about what doubling looked like applied to a number that was already climbing. System note: sacred gear integration with system architecture will activate upon hosts reaching level 15. Projected combined multiplier, variable and increasing. "I would like to discuss your offer," Issei said. Rias set her hands on the table between them, deliberate and open, the gesture of someone proposing terms. "I can make you one of my pieces," she said. "A devil. Reincarnated. You would have access to the Gremory peerage, to devil society, to resources and information and protection that a civilian in this town does not have." "I already have resources," he said, which was perhaps premature at level 7 but technically accurate. "What I need is information, access, and time. Tell me what you want from me in exchange." Rias looked at him for a long moment. "I want you on my side," she said. "Because whatever you are becoming, I would prefer you were not opposite me when you finished becoming it." He found this to be the most honest thing anyone had said to him in 2 days. "I will consider the formal affiliation," he said. "In the meantime, I want access to your information on the Fallen Angel operations, specifically everything connected to Raynare. And I want your assurance that Akeno will not attempt to resolve any further situations I am involved in by burying me in a cemetery." Akeno, still standing by the window, made a small sound that was either an apology or an exhale. "Agreed," Rias said. He stood. He had a gate to track down, and a system to advance, and a fallen angel to locate, and he had spent enough time in this room for the moment. "One more thing," he said from the doorway. Rias looked up. "I know about the convergence point. I know about the gate frequency increase. I am going to be dealing with the gates regardless of affiliation. If you want to share intelligence on the ones I clear, that arrangement would be mutually useful." He left before she could answer. The system generated a note as he walked back down the corridor: quest pathway updated. Diplomatic subroutine, active. Faction relationship, Gremory. Status, tentative. He told himself he had not accepted anything, which was true. He also told himself he had not ruled anything out, which was also true. Chapter 4: The Levels and the Dark. 12 days later. He cleared 5 gates in 12 days. The first 2 were rank D. The third was rank C, which meant the entities within were faster, and the system's recommended level for entry was 9, which he reached on the second day and surpassed on the fourth. The fourth gate was also rank C. The fifth was rank B. He did not enter the rank B gate immediately. He stood outside it for 20 minutes, looking at the system's readout, running the arithmetic on what a rank B environment would require of him, and what he currently had to offer it. The recommended minimum was level 15. He was level 12. The gap was 3 levels, which was smaller than the gap had been at the warehouse on day 1, and he had handled the warehouse gap by using the choke point tactic and Kage as the absorber. He had 23 shadows now. He had organized them into a structure the system called a Shadow Vanguard, 7 units designated for direct engagement, 8 for flanking and suppression, 4 for aerial observation. 3 of the entities from the rank C gates had been capable of flight, and their shadow forms had retained that capability, and 4 held in reserve. He decided the rank B gap was acceptable. He was right, though not comfortably. The rank B gate held entities that the system classified as elite scouts, which were faster and more tactically coherent than anything he had fought before. They worked in coordinated pairs. They attempted to separate him from his vanguard using the gate's terrain, a complex network of underground chambers with multiple entry and exit points. They failed to separate him because Ruler's authority meant his tactical overlay updated at thought speed and his vanguard responded at thought speed, and the gap between his command and their execution was essentially 0. He cleared the gate in 41 minutes. When he came out, he was level 15. His strength was 47. His agility was 41. His intelligence was 58. His sense was 44. His vitality was 52. System note: level 15 threshold reached. Sacred gear integration initiating. Boosted gear activating. The gauntlet appeared on his left arm between one heartbeat and the next. It was dark red, almost black, with joints of some material that was neither metal nor bone, and a gem on the back of the hand that glowed in the crimson-black spectrum. It was large. It changed the proportions of his left arm the way a weapon changes the proportions of the hand holding it. A voice came from the gem. It said, deep and slow and with the weight of something very old that had been very patient, "Partner." The system generated a notification simultaneously. Sacred gear sentience confirmed. Entity, Drake. Dragon God of Domination. Status, integrated. Boost timer, active. He looked at the gauntlet. Dragon God, he said. The gem pulsed once, correct. How long have you been in there? A pause. Then long. Issei considered this. I have a system, he said. It makes me stronger based on combat and level accumulation. Your boost doubles my current power at set intervals. Are these systems compatible? Another pause longer. When Drake responded, there was something in the low resonance of his voice that might have been appreciation. You are asking about mathematics before you are asking about power. You are not what I expected. I have heard that recently, Issei said. The gem pulsed again, differently this time. Warmer, if warmth was a quality a gem could express. Compatible, Drake said. More than compatible. The system raises a baseline. I double it. Whatever your baseline becomes, I will double it. He walked home from the gate location in the fading light of the early evening with the dragon in his left arm and 23 shadows around him and a level 15 frame that was already calculating the trajectory of a level 20, level 30, level 50 future. The fallen angel Raynare was somewhere in Ko. He had an intelligence report from Rias Gremory's peerage on the location of the fallen angel's base of operations, passed to him through Akeno, who had delivered it with an expression that was trying very hard not to be apologetic and succeeding about 60% of the way. He was not yet ready to move on Raynare. He had established this benchmark in the first hour after the system arrived and he had not changed it. He would not move on personal objectives until he was confident that his operational capacity was sufficient. Taking on a fallen angel lieutenant at level 7 because he was angry would have been the Issei Hyoudou who had died in the park. taking her on at the moment of his choosing, at the level he selected, with the force structure he had built, was something different. He was learning to be patient. The system was excellent at teaching patience because it was excellent at showing you exactly how much stronger you were going to be in 2 days, 3 days, a week. The curve was visible. The endpoint was not, and that was the part that interested him most. Rias Gremory appeared on his way home. Not in the way someone appears when they are following you. In the way someone appears when they have correctly predicted where you would be and arranged to be there first. She was standing at the corner of the street 2 blocks from his house with her crimson hair slightly disordered by the wind, wearing the uniform with the ease of someone for whom uniforms were merely the costume of the context they were operating in. You cleared the rank B gate, she said. You were watching it, he said. I had a sensor near it. You are level 15. 15, he confirmed. She looked at his left arm. The gauntlet had retracted, which he had discovered it was capable of doing when he did not specifically require it to be manifest. But something in her eyes suggested she could perceive the sacred gear even in its dormant state. Drake, she said softly. He seems cooperative. Rias was quiet for a moment in the way that meant she was deciding how much of what she was thinking to say. The boosted gear at level 15, integrated with whatever system you are operating, makes you potentially the most dangerous entity in Ko, she said. I want you to understand that I am not saying this to flatter you. I am saying it because it changes how I need to position this conversation. Position it however you need to, he said. I am asking you, formally, to join my peerage. Not because of what happened with Akeno. Not as an apology. Because you are building something that would benefit from being inside a structure that has been managing supernatural Ko for 3 years. And my structure would benefit from having you inside it. He looked at her. The system was running analysis in his peripheral vision, Gremory peerage integration, resource assessment, information access, protective structure, cross-reference with current operational needs. The analysis was favorable. Not uncritically favorable. The system flagged 3 areas of potential conflict, primarily around operational autonomy, but assessed the net benefit as positive. I have conditions, he said. I expected conditions. I maintain independent operational authority over the gates. I clear them on my own timeline, with my own structure. You get the intelligence from those clearances and I get your intelligence on gate origins and faction movements. Acceptable. My shadow soldiers are mine. Not part of the peerage structure. Mine. She paused at this one. Acceptable, she said, after a moment. And Raynare, he said. Rias was very still. What about her? When I am ready to move on her, I move. No consultation required. No peerage politics. No timing based on faction diplomacy. Another pause longer. On the condition that the action does not destabilize the current ceasefire agreement between the Gremory House and the Fallen Angel faction in a way that creates unmanageable blowback, Rias said. I will not ask you to delay indefinitely. I will ask you to give me 24 hours of advance notice so I can prepare. He found this to be reasonable. Agreed, he said. She extended her hand. He shook it. He was now, technically, a devil. He was also, technically, whatever the system had been building him toward, and he suspected that designation was going to turn out to be more operationally relevant than the first one. Welcome to the Gremory peerage, Rias said. He nodded and walked the last 2 blocks home. He had gates to clear. He had a level ceiling to push. He had a dragon in his arm and 23 shadows on his flanks and an intelligence stat that was currently at 58, and climbing. Somewhere in Ko, Raynare was running operations. He was going to be ready when it mattered. Chapter 5, Shadow Queens. The Gremory Base. 1 week after joining, the Gremory peerage occupied the old-school building's abandoned wing in a way that suggested a permanent and comfortable installation. Rias had furnished it well. There were bookshelves containing what Issei recognized as supernatural research materials, a training space, a strategy table with a topographical map of Ko and its surrounding territories, and a communications array that Akeno managed with the quiet efficiency that seemed to characterize everything she did. He studied the room with the same systematic approach he had applied to everything else in the past 3 weeks. The Gremory peerage currently consisted of Rias herself, King; Akeno Himejima, Queen; 2 reclass members named Kaneko Tuju and a larger upperclassman called Hyoudou Kiba. 2 bishops he had not yet formally met. And himself, designated as pawn, which the system had tagged with a note, pawn designation. System analysis. Classification understates actual threat level by significant margin. He had not mentioned this to Rias. He met the full peerage for the first time in the 3rd week of October. At a tactical briefing, Rias called specifically because gate frequency in Co had tripled in the past 8 days and the Gremory House intelligence arm was reporting indicators of a coordinated push rather than natural fluctuation. Kaneko Tuju was small and white-haired and looked at him with the steady appraisal of someone who had been underestimated often enough to have developed a very accurate calibration for when other people were being underestimated. Kiba was courteous and precise and had the body language of someone who had trained extensively, and was not in the habit of advertising it. The 2 bishops were Gremory cousins on retainer, present but not primary. He sat across from Rias at the strategy table and listened to the briefing. The tripling of gate frequency had a pattern. The gates were opening in a rough arc from the eastern edge of Ko to the northern outskirts, and the arc was pointing towards something. The system had already shown him this on the map overlay before he came into the briefing, had traced the geometric progression of gate sites and extrapolated the terminus, a location in the northern mountains, 15 kilometers from Koa's boundary. He said nothing about this during the briefing. He listened to Rias's analysis, which reached the same conclusion from a different data set, and watched her mark the northern mountains on the topographical map. The gate pattern suggests a primary convergence point, she said. Something is being assembled there. We do not yet know what. I do, Issei said. The room was quiet. He pulled up the system display and partially manifested the overlay in the visual spectrum, a capability he had discovered 2 days ago, and had not yet deployed in company. The pale blue display of the system map appeared over the strategy table, visible to the supernaturally sensitive members of the room, showing the gate locations with their connecting lines and the extrapolated terminus. At the terminus, the system had placed a notation it had generated that morning, Gate Nexus. Rank A installation. Entity count unknown. Generating authority unknown. Recommended action, reconnaissance before assault. Kaneko looked at the display with something that was not quite surprise. Akeno looked at it with an expression that was complicated. Rias looked at it for a long time. You have a system, she said. It was not phrased as a question, but it had the quality of a question, the quality of someone who had suspected something and was now confirming it. Yes. And it is generating intelligence on gate activity, among other things. Another quiet moment. What is your current level? She asked. He told her. The room was quiet again, but differently. This was the quiet of rapid recalibration. A gate nexus at rank A is beyond what the Gremory peerage can currently address, Rias said carefully. Even with my power and Akeno's, a rank A installation would require either significantly more force or a significantly stronger individual anchor. I am aware, he said. You are proposing to be the anchor. I am proposing to be the primary force, he corrected. Your peerage serves as the containment structure. You prevent anything from exiting the nexus zone while I am inside. I clear the interior. Rias looked at him. Your shadow soldiers, she said. 23 currently. I expect to have more before we move on the nexus. She drummed 2 fingers on the strategy table once, and then stopped. You are asking me to trust your capability assessment, she said. I am presenting my capability assessment, and inviting you to evaluate it, he replied. The assessment includes the fact that I cleared a rank B gate at level 12, 3 levels below the system's minimum recommendation, with 0 casualties. Kaneko spoke for the first time. Her voice was flat and even and very precise. The gates are getting bigger because something is pulling them open. If we do not close the source, the frequency will keep increasing. Yes, Issei said. How long before you are ready to move on the nexus? Rias asked. He had already run this calculation. The leveling curve from where he was to where he needed to be for the nexus assault, accounting for the gates he planned to clear in the intervening period and the shadow soldiers he would extract from those clearances. 11 days, he said. Possibly 10. Rias held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, 11 days, then? He cleared 2 more gates in the days that followed. The 6th gate was rank B. The 7th was another rank B with a modifier the system labeled Elite Variant, which meant the entities within were drawn from the upper percentile of their classification and operated with an additional layer of tactical sophistication. The Elite Variant gate held 32 entities and took him 63 minutes. When he came out he was level 19. He had 37 shadow soldiers. He had reorganized them. He no longer used the term vanguard in his internal taxonomy. He had read, in the Devil Society materials Rias had given him access to through the peerage, about the architecture of infernal military structures, and he had found the concept of monarchs useful. His strongest shadows, the ones extracted from the most capable entities and whose combat profiles the system rated as class within the shadow architecture, he designated shadow generals. He had 4. He named them. Kage remained Kage. The second general was a shadow extracted from the largest of the elite variant entities, massive and slow-striking but with defensive capability that the system rated as equivalent to heavy fortification. He named this one Tetsu. The third was the fastest thing he had extracted, capable of movement that in the physical entities had bordered on teleportation and in the shadow form operated as a consistent speed multiplier well above anything the Vanguard could match. He named this one Senator. The fourth was the Ranged Specialist, a shadow extracted from an entity whose original form had generated projectile attacks at a rate and accuracy that had nearly been a problem, and which in shadow form translated to a range capacity his formation had been lacking. He named this one Yumi. Kage. Tetsu. Senator Yumi. 4 generals. 33 line soldiers. 37 total. System note. Host has named shadow generals. Naming protocol activates accelerated growth track for named units. Named shadows will scale at 1.5x rate of unnamed units. He noted this. He decided he would name more of them as their capabilities emerged. On the 9th day after the Gremory briefing, Akeno found him in the old building's training space. He had been using the space in the early mornings because it was empty at that hour, and he needed room for the full Vanguard deployment drills he was running with his generals. The drills were functional, not performative. He needed to understand his formation's response times at the scale he was operating at, needed to have the deployment data built into his tactical overlay before he took the Nexus so that in the Nexus he was not making decisions he should have made in advance. Akeno came in during the tail end of a drill, when he had his 37 shadows arranged in 3 concentric rings around him in the wide open space, running a simulated encirclement scenario. She stopped at the door. He saw her. He did not stop the drill. She watched the 37 shadows move in coordinated silence, watched and trace the outer perimeter at full speed, watched Tetsu hold a static defensive anchor at the center while the line soldiers peeled into flanking formations at the thought speed commands from ruler's authority. He dismissed the formation after 2 more minutes. The shadows dissolved back into their phase-adjacent state, still present, invisible again to the average eye. Akeno crossed the room. She stopped 3 meters from him and looked at the floor briefly, and then looked up and held the eye contact with a visible effort. I wanted to apologize, she said. Properly. Without the room being there. He waited. I was following Rias-sama's instruction, and I believe the intelligence we had been given, and I know that neither of those things makes it different for you. I stabbed you through the chest and buried you and you came back. She paused. I would like you to know that I understand what I did. Not abstractly. Specifically. He looked at her. He found, when he examined it carefully, that his assessment of the event and its perpetrator was genuinely without the quality of sustained anger. He had been killed. He had come back stronger. The death had been the mechanism through which the system had integrated, and without the integration, none of this existed. He was not prepared to be grateful for having been killed, but he was also not carrying it as a wound. I need you operationally effective for the Nexus, he said. So I need you to stop carrying this in a way that will impair that. She blinked. That is not precisely what I expected you to say. I know what you expected. You expected either continued anger or a magnanimous forgiveness that resolved the emotional situation neatly. I am telling you it is either. What happened, happened. It is data. It is in the past. What I need from you for the Nexus is your full operational capacity, which means you need to stop arriving at your own briefings with the weight of this on you. Akeno was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are a very strange person, Issei Hyoudou." "I have heard that recently as well," he said. Something in her expression shifted. The specific, effortful gravity she had arrived with eased slightly into something else, not quite lighter but differently weighted, the expression of someone whose problem has not been solved but has been repositioned. "Tell me what you need from me in the Nexus," she said. He pulled up the formation plan on the system overlay and began to walk her through it. Chapter 6, The Nexus at Night. Northern Mountains. Day 11. They left at 2 in the morning. Issei had picked the time for operational reasons. The Nexus was generating activity that the system tracked in real time, and the data showed a reduction in internal entity movement between 0100 and 0400, a period the system labeled rotation cycle, entities at minimum operational distribution. He had explained this to Rias, and she had accepted it without question, which was one of the things he had come to appreciate about her in 11 days. She asked good questions about plans she found genuinely unclear, and she did not ask questions about plans she understood. The northern mountains were cold in the way mountains at altitude are cold in October, a clean pervasive cold that settled into the sinuses and made the breath visible. The Nexus was ahead of them, not visible to the naked eye but radiant to the system overlay, a dense concentration of red light that lit up his vision like a building that had all its windows open. He deployed the formation 1 kilometer from the target. The Gremory peerage took the outer perimeter. Rias and Akeno at the cardinal points, Kaneko and Kiba at the intercardinal, the bishop class members at the access routes, withstanding instruction to prevent exits and alert him if anything came through. He had given each of them a stone that Drake had helped him construct over the past 2 days, a shadow-anchored communication relay that would carry his awareness of their positions to his tactical overlay. He went to the Nexus with his 37 shadows. The Nexus entrance was a gate that dwarfed every gate he had previously cleared. It was 8 meters tall and 5 meters wide, and the edges were not the dark red of the rank D and C gates. They were deep violet, almost black, with an interior light that was not warm. He stood in front of it for 30 seconds and let the system finish its assessment. Gate Nexus. Rank A, Entities, 89. Classification Mix, Standard, Elite, Commander Class. Commander Class Entities, 4. Nexus Authority, 1. Host Current Level, 19. Boosted Gear Status, Available. System Recommendation, Full Formation Deployment. Estimated Clearance Time, 90,140 minutes. He went in. The interior of the Nexus was not a series of corridors this time. It was a vast underground space, several hundred meters across, with a ceiling lost in darkness and a floor that had been smoothed into a plane of dark stone. It was lit by clusters of luminous material embedded in the walls, cold light, colorless, enough to see by. The entities were distributed through the space in rough groupings that the system identified as patrol circuits. Standard entities in the outer ring. Elites in the middle. Commander class near the center, where 4 large structures rose from the floor, architectural forms that looked like they had been grown rather than built. At the center of the 4 structures, the Nexus Authority. The system would not fully classify it. It held the notation open, cycling, Nexus Authority. Classification Processing. Power Level, Anomalous. Comparison Data, Insufficient. He studied it from the entrance for 20 seconds. The Nexus Authority was large. 7 meters, roughly. It had features that suggested a physical form without committing to one, a face that shifted, limbs that resolved differently each time he looked. It was seated at the center of the 4 structures in a posture that might have been meditation. It was also, clearly, the source of the gate frequency increase. The system confirmed this with a notation that appeared at the bottom of the assessment. Nexus Authority is gate generation source. Elimination of Nexus Authority will terminate all affiliated gate activity. He issued the deployment command at thought speed. 37 shadows moved. The outer patrol ring had 11 entities. Sun hit the arc at full speed, and the 11 entities became 6 before any of them had processed what was happening. The remaining 6 drew weapons that made sounds like stones breaking, and Kage took the 3 on the right and the line soldiers took the 3 on the left, and the outer ring was cleared in 40 seconds. The elites in the middle ring responded. There were 28 of them, and they did not scatter or panic. They formed a line, which was tactically correct, and they pushed forward, which was less correct, because pushing forward brought them into the formation depth where Tetsu was anchored, and the pressure wave of 28 elites pressing forward broke on Tetsu the way water breaks on a harbor wall. He handled the left flank personally. His strength at level 19 was 61. With Drake's boost active it was 122. He had used the boost sparingly in the rank B gates because the 10-second window required him to deploy it at the right moment, but he had now run enough engagements to know exactly when the right moment was. He brought the boost up at the moment the elites committed to their line push, moved into the left flank while they were locked on Tetsu, and worked through them with a speed and force that the system's combat log later described as decisive. 31 minutes. The middle ring was clear. He had lost 2 shadow soldiers. Line Unit 7 and Line Unit 19. Extracted immediately from the entities that had destroyed them. 37 remaining. The 4 commander-class entities at the center were waiting. They had watched the outer and middle rings fall and they had not moved to intervene. He noted this. It suggested either overconfidence or a deliberate strategy of conservation. The commanders were tall, 3 meters each, with the kind of physical presence that made the air feel different around them. The system assessed them, COMMANDRCLSS. Equivalent host level, 16-18. Recommended, engage sequentially. Simultaneous engagement risk, high. He sent his 4 generals at them in pairs. Kage and Tetsu to the north pair. Sin and Yumi to the south pair. He went to the Nexus Authority. It opened its eyes when he was 15 meters away. They were gold, and they were not warm, and they regarded him with the particular quality of attention that something gives to something it does not expect to have to take seriously, and is now revising its position on. It spoke. The language was not one he knew, but the system translated it at the edges of his hearing. You are small to come to this place. You generated 89 gates in a residential town, Issei said. I have been waiting until I was ready to deal with you. The Nexus Authority looked at him. You waited, it said. The register of its voice changed slightly on the word. I waited, he confirmed. It rose from its seated position. 7 meters of anomalous entity standing up was a process that took several seconds, and involved the restructuring of the air around it. When it was fully upright it was looking down at him from a height that was designed to be intimidating. He activated the boost. Drake, partner. Now is the correct moment. The gauntlet blazed. His strength moved from 61 to 122. His whole frame resonated with it, a pressure that started at the left arm and moved through the skeleton, and he moved. What followed was not elegant. The Nexus Authority was powerful. Genuinely powerful, the kind of powerful that explained the rank A classification and the system's difficulty in assessing it. It was also faster than anything his size had any right to be, and it hit in a way that suggested it had been doing this for longer than Ko had existed. He was hit 3 times. The first hit he partially avoided with a combination of sense speed data feeding his reflex overlay and the sense attribute's predictive geometry. He took glancing contact on the left shoulder and felt the impact travel through him like a physical statement about the power differential. The second hit he did not avoid. He absorbed it on Tetsu's shield, which he had pulled back from the commander engagement because the generals could hold 2 commanders without him, and Tetsu took the full force of the Nexus Authority's second strike and was not destroyed but was staggered severely enough that the system flagged Tetsu at 30% operational capacity. He sent Tetsu to the rear. The third hit he stepped into. This was not an accident. It was a calculation. The Nexus Authority's third strike committed its weight to a specific movement path, and the cost of that commitment was a moment, a fraction of a moment, where its guard was open. He had seen this in the data across all 3 of its strikes, the pattern completing on the third, and he stepped into it with the boost at full output, and he hit the Nexus Authority in the structural joint where the system had flagged a weakness. The same logic as the Shadow Scout in the cemetery but applied at a scale and velocity that turned the weak point from a tactical advantage into an operational fact. The Nexus Authority fell. Not gently. It fell the way large things fall, with a sound that was more impact than sound, and it did not get up. The system processed. Nexus authority defeated. Gate generation terminated. All affiliated gates closing. Experience reward major. Level up X4. Current level, 23. He stood in the center of the Nexus with his shadows around him and his boost fading and his shoulder acknowledging, with mild interest, that it had taken significant damage. A new prompt appeared. Shadow extraction, Nexus authority available. Extract? He extracted. What came out of the air when he pulled was not a soldier's-sized shadow. It was larger. It rose to 4 meters and stood with its head bowed and its hands at its sides, and the system tagged it with a notation he had not seen before: Shadow Sovereign Class. Independent Growth Track. Maximum Designation. He named it Kuru. System note: named Sovereign Class Shadow Acknowledged. Kuru. Growth Track Sovereign Scale. Ruler's Authority Upgrade. Sovereign Command Protocol Active. He stood in the dying light of the Nexus and looked at his shadows. 4 generals, 33 line soldiers, 1 sovereign, 38 total. Level 23. Drake pulsed once from the gauntlet, slow and approving. Well done, partner. He walked out of the Nexus. Rias was waiting at the perimeter with the full peerage arrayed behind her. She looked at him when he came out. He had the shadow soldiers in phase state, invisible, but her devil senses would be telling her they were there in significant number. She looked at his shoulder, which was still reporting structural feedback that he was managing through the system's vitality regeneration pathway. She looked at the Nexus behind him, which was contracting, its edges dimming as the authority that had sustained it ceased to function. It is over, he said. Rias looked at the contracting Nexus for a long moment. All the gates, she said. You eliminated the source. Yes. She looked back at him. She had an expression he was learning to read, the one that appeared when she had updated her model of something significantly, and was adjusting to the update. What level are you now? She asked. 23. Akeno, slightly to Rias's right, was watching him with both composure and something that was not quite composure occupying the same face. Kaneko was looking at the space around him where his shadows were phase present, head slightly tilted, the precise assessment she applied to everything. Kiba stood with his hands at his sides and nodded once. A soldier's acknowledgement. The fallen angel base is still operational, Issei said. Raynare is still in Co. Rias nodded. I know, she said. I want to move on it within the week. She met his eyes. I will have the 24 hours ready, she said. I will not give you less than that. She held his gaze. The Nexus was a rank A installation, she said. You cleared it alone. I cleared it with my formation. With your formation, she agreed. Which means the fallen angel operation is well within your current capacity. Yes. Rias was quiet for a moment. Then we will be ready when you are. He looked at the mountain sky. The stars were visible and cold, and abundant. Somewhere in Co below them, Raynare was finishing a night's work with no knowledge that the Nexus had fallen. He had 11 days of data on her operations patterns. He had level 23, strength 79, intelligence 81, a dragon and 38 shadows and a sacred gear at full integration. He had waited until he was ready. He was ready. Act 2. The Reckoning of Raynare. Power is not the weapon. Patience is. Chapter 7, 24 hours. Co. The morning before the strike. He gave Rias her 24 hours at 6 in the morning. He sent the notification through the shadow relay stone in 2 words, tomorrow night. He had debated longer phrasing and decided against it. She would understand. She had been waiting for this message since the Nexus fell, and she had the kind of mind that did not require elaborate framing to follow a concise signal. Then he spent the 24 hours doing what he always did before an operation. He prepared. Preparation, for Issei Hyoudou at level 23, looked nothing like preparation had looked for the version of him that had existed 3 weeks ago. It was not about getting enough sleep or eating well or gathering his courage or any of the other human preliminaries that the old Issei would have required. It was data processing, formation review, and the quiet work of building a complete picture of the objective before the objective became active. He pulled up the fallen angel base intelligence on the system overlay. The intelligence had come from 3 sources. First, Rias's peerage network, which had been tracking the fallen angels' cooperation for 18 months and had extensive documentation on the base layout, personnel count, and operational patterns. Second, the system's own environmental mapping, which had been updating in real time since he entered range of the location 2 weeks ago and had produced a floor plan overlay that the Gremory intelligence and the system data agreed on in every particular. Third, and most precisely, his own reconnaissance. He had done 3 reconnaissance passes on the base. Not physically. The system allowed him to send phase-adjacent shadows into map territory at his direction, and Kage, being the oldest and most developed of his extraction soldiers, had the sensitivity to relay environmental data back through the ruler's authority connection with a fidelity that was close to first-hand observation. The base was a converted industrial facility on the eastern edge of Ko, one of the old processing plants that had been empty for years before the fallen angels requisitioned it. The civilian exterior, chain-link fencing and no trespassing signage and windows blinded with industrial film, was intact and unremarkable. The interior had been divided into operational zones, a command section in the former administrative wing, a deployment staging area in the main processing floor, and a ritual preparation space in the basement that the system flagged with a notation it generated based on the environmental signature Kage had relayed. The notation said, "Ritual space? Active preparation. Unknown objective. Energy signature, sacred gear adjacent." He had spent 2 days parsing that notation. A ritual space in a fallen angel base with a sacred gear adjacent energy signature had one likely explanation. They were trying to extract something from a sacred gear, or attempting to replicate one, or doing something to one that the system did not have category language for yet. He did not know whose sacred gear. He did not know what the extraction would produce. He knew it was not something he wanted completed before he arrived. The system had provided a personnel count, 31 fallen angel operatives on the base, with 6 designated as reinforced, which was the system's classification for entities whose power profile exceeded the standard baseline for their species. Raynare was among the 6. The system's assessment of Raynare specifically was precise. Fallen angel. Rank, Lieutenant. Combat class, Aminous. Sacred gear awareness, high. Probability of autonomous defensive response upon host detection, 97%. He had read that last notation several times. 97% meant she was not the kind of opponent who waited to see what you were going to do. She would move immediately, and she would move toward escalation. He needed to be inside the base's decision cycle before she could complete the escalation, which meant the operation required speed at the entry stage and control at every stage after. He reviewed his formation. 38 shadows. 4 generals. 1 sovereign. He had given Kuru a specific briefing through ruler's authority. The sovereign-class shadow was to anchor the ritual basement, prevent whatever was happening there from progressing, and hold that position regardless of what occurred in the floors above. Tetsu would back the perimeter. Sin would handle the aerial component, because fallen angels had wings and wings meant 3-dimensional movement that his ground-based line soldiers were not optimized for. Yumi would suppress the 6 reinforced targets before they could fully engage. Kage would be at his shoulder throughout. He reviewed the formation 3 times. He found no significant gaps. Then he went to sleep, because he was level 23 and the operation was 15 hours away and being rested was still an operational variable even when you had a system. Rias had prepared. He could see this when he arrived at the Gremory base at 10 in the evening, 14 hours after he had sent the relay message. The full peerage was assembled and the strategy table had been cleared of everything except the topographical map with the industrial facility marked on it, and Rias was standing at the head of the table in a state of focused composure that he recognized as her pre-operation mode. She had changed out of the school uniform into something that suggested she had thought about operational mobility. Akeno was beside her in the same mode. Kaneko was seated at the corner of the table eating something that appeared to be a small snack, which was very much in keeping with everything he knew about her. Kiba was sharpening a blade he had not previously seen Kiba carry. It was slender and very long, and had the quality of something that had been made for a specific purpose a long time ago. Operation brief, Issei said, setting his own system overlay on the table as a visible display. Entry point is the Eastern Service entrance. The facility standard patrols have a 12-minute rotation with a 4-minute gap at the 2,200-hour mark. We enter during the gap. He walked them through it. He had organized the brief into 3 phases. Phase 1, entry and clearance of the deployment staging floor, which held the bulk of the non-reinforced operatives. Phase 2, suppression of the 6 reinforced targets in the administrative wing. Phase 3, the basement ritual space, which he would handle personally with Kuru and Kage while the peerage held the cleared floors above. He did not assign Rias or Akeno to Phase 3. Rias noticed. The basement, she said. I will handle the basement. What is in the basement? Something involving a sacred gear. I do not yet know whose. I need to contain it before it can be completed. She looked at him for a moment. You are not telling me everything about what is down there. I am telling you everything I know with certainty. The rest is inference that I do not want to present as fact before I have confirmed it. She held his gaze for 3 seconds and then moved on, which was one of the things he valued about her operational mode. She distinguished between information she needed and information she wanted, and she did not let the second category slow the first. The briefing took 11 minutes. At 21:45 they moved out. The 4-minute patrol gap opened exactly when the system predicted it would. Issei took the Eastern Service entrance with Kage at his shoulder, and Sen deployed overhead in phase state, and 35 line soldiers arranged in the entry formation he had drilled 17 times in the training space. Behind him, the Gremory peerage came in single file, Rias last, her crimson hair dark in the low light. The facility interior was dim. Emergency-grade lighting only, strips of low amber along the floor level of the main processing hall. The system overlay painted the space in blue-white, showing him the heat signatures of the 11 standard operatives on the floor, their positions, their orientations, their weapon configurations. He issued the deployment command. The 35 line soldiers spread through the processing hall in 4 seconds. They moved in phase state until they were at range, which meant the 11 operatives did not see them until the moment of contact, and by the time the first operative responded the formation had already closed on all 11 simultaneously. 11 targets. 18 seconds. He did not move from the entry point during the floor clearance. He watched through the ruler's authority overlay, tracking each shadow's engagement, noting the 2 targets who attempted to break for the interior stairwell and redirecting Sen from the overhead position to cut those 2 off before they cleared the first landing. Sen cut them off. The processing hall was clear. He looked at the Gremory peerage behind him. No casualties. No engagement required from them. Rias had her power ready and had not needed to use it, which he could see in the slight adjustment she made when the hall went quiet, the readjustment of someone who had prepared for impact and found the moment had already passed. Phase 2, he said. Administrative wing. 6 reinforced targets. Yumi suppresses. Your peerage engages after suppression. Rias nodded. They moved up the stairwell. Chapter 8, 6 reinforced. The administrative wing. 2,214 hours. The administrative wing had been a set of offices in its previous life. The fallen angels had removed most of the interior walls, which created an open floor plan that would have been comfortable for a medium-sized company and was now a medium-sized problem, because open floor plans meant no choke points, and no choke points meant the 6 reinforced targets had full freedom of movement. The system painted them in red on his overlay, 2 near the windows on the north side, 1 at what had been a reception desk, 2 more in the far corner doing something that involved a low table and several objects the system classified as ritual components, and Raynare. Raynare was in the center of the room. She was standing with her back to the stairwell door, which meant her back was to him, which meant she had not detected the entry. He had 4 seconds, possibly 5, before the spatial awareness that a rank Amanus combatant would naturally possess completed the calculation that something had changed in the floors below. He issued Yumi's command. Yumi materialized from phase state at the ceiling line of the administrative wing, which was high enough that the 6 reinforced targets would not have been tracking it as a threat vector, and deployed the suppression barrage that the system had classified as its primary function, a cascade of condensed shadow projectiles, moving at the speed the system designated high velocity. targeting the weapon arms of all 6 reinforced targets simultaneously. Yumi hit 5 of 6 on the first volley. The 6th was Raynare. She had turned in the time between the command and the execution. Not because she had detected Yumi specifically. Because she had detected the change in atmospheric pressure that shadow materialization produced, a faint displacement that any sufficiently sensitive being would register as anomalous, and she had turned and moved before the volley arrived, and Yumi's projectile passed through the space where her weapon arm had been. She was very fast. The system updated her assessment in real time. Raynare. Combat class, ominous. Current behavioral mode, reactive escalation. Threat level to host, significant. Threat level to host at current stats, manageable. He noted the distinction between significant and manageable. The peerage came through the stairwell door behind him and engaged the 5 suppressed reinforced targets. Rias handled 2 with a precision that demonstrated why the Gremory house had managed Koa's supernatural territory for 3 years without losing it. Akeno took 1 with a speed that surprised him slightly, a targeting efficiency he had not seen from her in their training room interactions. Kiba moved to the far corner, and the 2 targets working with the ritual components found that the long slender blade he had been sharpening earlier was considerably less elegant in its purpose than its appearance suggested. Kaneko, without visible effort or apparent urgency, put the reception desk target through the wall. All 5 engaged. All 5 contained. Raynare had used the engagement window to put 20 meters between herself and the room's primary action, which was tactically correct of her, and she was watching him from across the administrative wing with an expression that he could see clearly even at 20 meters. It was not the expression he had expected. He had expected cold calculation. He had expected the expression of a professional who was reorienting her threat assessment. What he saw was something else, a quality of recognition that suggested she knew what he was before she had finished processing how he had arrived. Sacred Gear host, she said. Her voice was level, which he credited to her. Hiya to Issei, he said. A pause. You are supposed to be dead. I was, he said. Briefly, she looked at him. She looked at the room. She looked at Kage, who was visible beside him in manifested form, and at the 33 line soldiers who had followed the peerage up the stairwell, and were now arranged at the room's perimeter. She looked at the boosted gear gauntlet on his left arm, which he had not retracted because the operation was still active. The calculation she was running was visible in the stillness of her face, and it was not a long calculation. You are not alone, she said, meaning the shadows. You have something. A system of some kind. Yes. That is not how sacred gears work. No, he agreed. It is not. She was looking at the gauntlet now, specifically, with the focused attention of someone who recognized what she was looking at and was updating her understanding of the situation's severity. Drag, she said. The same quality Rias had used. Recognition and weight combined. The gem pulsed once. Correct. She did not move. He did not move. The room held the particular stillness of 2 decision trees that had not yet selected their next branch. Then she said very quietly, What do you want? He had thought about this question. He had anticipated it would arrive in some form, and he had thought about the answer with the same care he applied to everything now. The simple answer was that he wanted the fallen angel operation in Ko shut down. The precise answer was more specific. I want the ritual in the basement stopped. I want every fallen angel operative currently in this facility removed from Ko permanently. And I want to know what you were doing with the sacred gear signature you have been building down there. She was quiet. And if I tell you, then the operation ends cleanly. No further action against fallen angel personnel beyond removal from Ko territory. Another pause. You are offering terms, she said. I am offering terms, he confirmed. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not know what she was reading in his face, and he did not particularly care. He had the room, he had the formation, he had the sovereign-class shadow in the basement, and he had 33 line soldiers and the full Gremory peerage behind him. She had clear sight lines and the specific knowledge of what the boosted gear was. She made a decision. He could see it happen. The basement ritual is an extraction attempt, she said. Not from a living host. From a recovered fragment. We identified a sacred gear fragment at the convergence point 6 months ago, and we have been attempting to isolate the residual power signature. He thought about this. What kind of fragment? She said the name. He did not recognize it. But the system did. The notation appeared immediately. Sacred gear fragment identified. Classification: Longinus adjacent. Residual power: contained but significant. Risk profile if extraction completes: escalation class. He looked at the notation for 1 second. Then he told Kura through the Sovereign Command Protocol to close the ritual space completely, seal the fragment's energy signature, and prevent any further approach to the ritual preparation until he arrived personally. Kuru acknowledged through the link with a pulse that he had learned to interpret as confirmation. The ritual is stopped, he said to Raynare. Now. The evacuation of your personnel from Ko. I need that completed within 48 hours. Raynare looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not quite resignation and not quite relief, but something in the space between the two. 48 hours, she said. 48 hours. If any fallen angel operative is identified in Ko after that window, the terms are void. She looked at the room one more time. At the contained reinforced operatives. At the peerage. At his formation. Agreed, she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and then turned toward the stairwell that led to the basement. Kage, he said. Kage fell into step behind him. Rias caught his arm at the stairwell door. Not hard. A touch, brief and deliberate, the kind that meant she wanted his attention without demanding it. He stopped. You are going to retrieve the fragment, she said. Yes. Alone. With Kage and Kuru. She looked at him. He had learned to read the layers of her expressions over the past 3 weeks, and what he saw in this one was a calculation that she was performing in real time, a weighing of what she knew against what she did not. The Longinus adjacent fragment, she said. If extracted incorrectly, it could destabilize the entire convergence point. I know, he said. You are not going to extract it incorrectly. It was not phrased as a question, but it had the architecture of one, of someone who had assessed the situation and arrived at a conclusion, but was presenting the conclusion to the person most relevant to it for confirmation. No, he said. I am not. She released his arm. He went down to the basement. Chapter 9: What Lies Beneath. The Ritual Basement. 2,241 hours. The basement was cold. Not the cold of a building that had been unheated for a long time. The cold of something that had been drawing heat from its environment for an operational purpose, the cold of a process. He felt it on the stairs and it increased as he descended, and by the time he reached the basement floor his breath was visible in the low amber emergency light. Kuru was standing at the center of the basement space with both arms extended, a 4-meter sovereign-class shadow holding a containment posture that Issei had not specifically programmed but that Kuru had arrived at independently, which was one of the properties of the sovereign designation the system had noted, non-standard adaptive behavior within mission parameters. The ritual space extended to all 4 walls. Whoever had built it had been thorough. The floor was marked with symbols that he recognized from the Gremory research materials as a stabilization array, the kind used to hold an unstable energy signature in place during transfer or study. In the center of the stabilization array, elevated on a structure that appeared to be a modified version of whatever the fallen angels used for altar furniture, was the fragment. It was small. He had expected something that looked like a sacred gear. Something with the physical weight that the boosted gear carried, the presence that Drake's gem had even before it activated. The fragment was approximately the size of his fist, dark, irregular in shape, and generating no visible light. What it was generating was the cold, which he now understood as a byproduct of the energy signature it was containing. The system was writing notations as fast as he could read them. Longinus adjacent fragment. Source: Sephiroth Graal lineage. Partial extraction from original gear. Date of separation unknown. Current stability 34%. Stabilization array integrity compromised by disruption of ritual preparation. Risk window active. He stood very still. 34% stability. The ritual preparation had been disrupted, which meant the stabilization array was degrading, which meant the fragment's contained energy was going to find the path of least resistance through that degrading containment at some point in the near future. Drake, he said quietly. The gem pulsed. Analyzing. A moment. Partner. The fragment is from the Holy Grail lineage. It is not hostile. It is frightened. It has been separated from its source for a significant period and it is using the cold as a defensive response. He processed this. It is aware. Yes. Not fully. Not the way I am aware. But sufficient to react to environment. He looked at the fragment. A piece of something sacred, separated from its source, cold and defensive in a basement that had been treating it as raw material. He looked at the stabilization array, at the degrading symbols, at the 34% stability notation blinking in his overlay. He looked at Kuru. Kuru was holding the containment posture with both arms extended. He had the sense, through the Sovereign Command Protocol link, that Kuru was not simply executing a position but was actively compensating for the array's degradation, was holding what the array could no longer hold on its own through some quality of the sovereign class extraction that the system had not explicitly described but that was apparently operational. He trusted Kuru's capacity for approximately 30 more minutes. He needed to decide what to do in 30 minutes. The system offered an option he had not seen before. It appeared in the overlay as a new protocol heading, generated in response to the specific circumstances of this room. Absorption pathway. Longinus adjacent fragment. System integration possible. Risk moderate. Outcome unknown. Host choice required. He read it twice. He had learned that when the system generated an unknown outcome notation, it meant the outcome was outside its predictive database, not that the outcome was negative. The system was honest about its own limits in a way he found useful. He looked at the fragment again. He thought about what Drake had said. Not hostile. Frightened. Defensive. He walked to the fragment. He did not touch it immediately. He stood in front of it and looked at it, and he spoke quietly, because Drake had said it was aware. I am not going to extract you, he said. I am not going to take you apart or study you or use you as material. Whatever they were planning to do here is over. The cold in the room did not change immediately. Then, very slowly, it eased. Not gone, not warm, but eased the way a hell breath eases when the threat that caused it has passed. The system updated, fragment stability, 41%. Increasing. He reached out and put his left hand over the fragment without touching it, the boosted gear gauntlet's palm facing downward, Drake's gem close to the fragment, but not in contact. Drake, I can speak to it. If you permit. Speak to it, he said. What passed between Drake and the fragment was not something he could hear or see. He felt it through the gauntlet as a change in the vibration of the metal, a frequency adjustment, two very old things that had been separated from their proper contexts having a conversation in a language that predated the classification systems the system used to understand them. The cold in the room continued to ease. Fragment stability, 67%. DDRIG, he said. The fragment will accept integration. It has been alone for a long time. It does not want to be alone anymore. It will come with you if you ask it directly. He lowered his hand until his palm was resting against the fragment's surface. It was warm, not the warmth he had expected from something that had been generating cold. It was the warmth of something that had been cold for a long time and had now found a source of heat, and was not going to let go. Absorption pathway initiating. Host confirmation required. Confirmed, he said. The fragment dissolved into his palm. Not painfully. Not even noticeably except for the warmth that spread from his left hand up through his arm and into his chest and settled there beside the shadow architecture and the system's framework and Drake's resonance, a fourth presence, quiet and old and deeply relieved. Fragment absorbed. Integration complete. New designation, Holy Grail Shard. Passive effect, Shadow Soldier Vitality and Regeneration enhanced. Host Vitality regeneration rate, tripled. Secondary effect, unlocking. He stood in the empty basement with the stabilization array dark around him and his four presences integrated, and the cold entirely gone from the air. Secondary effect unlocked, Sovereign's Grace. All Shadow Soldiers receive passive health restoration. Named units receive accelerated restoration. He looked at Kuru, who had lowered its arms when the fragment absorbed. He looked at Kage. He felt, through the ruler's authority overlay, the change moving through his entire formation above and outside the building, the 37 shadows he had deployed feeling the Holy Grail shards passive in the way a room feels when someone opens a window. He walked up the stairs. The administrative wing was quiet when he returned. The 5 reinforced operatives had been restrained. Raynare was standing by the north windows where she had been since the terms were agreed, not restrained, which was an implicit acknowledgement on the peerage's part that she had honored the agreement, and was not being treated as a prisoner. She looked at him when he came through the stairwell door. She looked at his left hand. Something moved in her expression. The fragment, she said, is no longer a fragment, he said. It is integrated. It is not going to be used for anyone's ritual. A pause. You integrated a Longinus adjacent piece, she said. Flat. Informational. Into your system. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. You understand what that means, she said. What you are now. I have some ideas, he said. 48 hours, Raynare. I will be counting. He turned to Rias. She was looking at his left hand. She had the expression she got when she was processing something that exceeded the categories she had been using to think about it, and needed to build a new one. We should leave, he said. The facility is clear. She nodded. They left. Outside, in the cold October air, the peerage assembled on the street in front of the converted facility, and Issei stood among them with the weight of 4 things in his chest and the system quietly updating his attribute sheet in the overlay. Intelligence, 94. Strength, 79. Vitality, 88. Sense, 71. Agility, 74. Level 23. Shadow formation, 38 units. Holy Grail shard, integrated. Drag pulsed. Partner. Tonight was well done. Tonight was necessary, he said quietly. Yes. Those are not mutually exclusive. He looked at Ko around him. The late October streets, empty at this hour, the convenience store lights 3 blocks away the only warm color in a landscape of gray and amber. He thought about the 48 hours. He thought about what came after 48 hours. He thought about the system's infinite ceiling. The curve was still climbing. Chapter 10, The 48 Hours. Ko. The following day, he went to school. This was also strategic, because in 3 weeks he had stopped going to school on days he had operations, and it had not escaped the notice of the people around him. Matsuda had left 3 messages. His homeroom teacher had flagged his attendance. His mother had asked him twice whether he was feeling well. He was feeling well. He was feeling the best he had felt in his entire 17-year life, which was an answer he could not give his mother, but the underlying attendance problem was real and required maintenance. He sat through 4 periods of class in the focused quiet that had replaced his previous classroom personality. He took notes. He answered questions when called on. He was, by the external metrics of secondary school attendance, a student attending school. The system ran quietly in his peripheral vision the entire time, updating the fallen angel evacuation progress through the environmental sensors it had seated around the industrial facility during the operation. By 0900 it showed 9 operatives departed from the facility. By 11:30 it showed 17. The 5 reinforced operatives who had been restrained the previous night had been released at dawn as part of the terms, which the system had suggested he offer, and which he had offered specifically because releasing them meant they were Raynare's problem to manage, and manage them meant she was occupied with logistics rather than reconsidering the agreement. She was, by every indicator the system had, honoring the agreement. He found this interesting rather than surprising. He had assessed her during the operation as someone whose operational code was built around calculated cost and calculated benefit rather than ideology or vengeance, and the calculated benefit of the agreement was substantial. She preserved her remaining personnel, she avoided a confrontation with an entity that had just cleared a rank A nexus and absorbed a Longinus-adjacent fragment. And she exited Ko with the framework of her operation intact even if the Ko installation was lost. The calculated cost was leaving. That was acceptable, to the kind of mind she had. He trusted the agreement. At lunch he went to the Gremory base. Rias was alone in the base when he arrived. Not waiting for him, specifically. She was at the research shelves, standing with a book open in her hands and the expression of someone reading something they had read before but needed to read again in the context of new information. She looked up when he came in. Akeno is in class, she said. Kaneko is on perimeter. Kiba is doing his own assessment of the facility from the outside, making sure the evacuation is genuine. I know, he said. I can see Kiba from the system map. She closed the book. It was the first time they had been alone in the base without an operation context, without a briefing or an analysis or a specific tactical question bringing them together. He was aware of this. He suspected she was too, which was probably why she had kept the book in her hands for the first moment after he came in, a neutral object occupying the space where an agenda would otherwise be. She set the book on the shelf. The Holy Grail shard, she said. Yes. You integrated it without knowing what it would do to you. I had partial information. The system's integration pathway was available. The fragment was going to destabilize and cause an escalation class event if left in the compromised array. The integration was the correct action under the circumstances. That is the operational reasoning, she said. I am asking about the personal one. He looked at her. He was not certain he had a personal reasoning, in the way she was asking about it. The decision had been made from data and probability and the system's framework, and the emotional component of it, if there had been one, had been Drake's assessment that the fragment was frightened and alone, and he had acted on that assessment because ignoring it would have been wrong in a way he could identify but not easily quantify. It was alone, he said. It had been separated from its source for a long time, and it was frightened, and the fallen angels were treating it as raw material. I integrated it because the integration was correct, operationally, and because leaving it to be used as raw material was not something I was willing to do. Rias was quiet for a moment. You care about things, she said. You work very hard to make that appear to be operational efficiency, but underneath it you care about things. He did not deny this. Is that a problem? He asked. She looked at him with the expression that he had come to think of as her most honest one, the one that appeared when she had stopped performing composure and was simply present in the conversation. No, she said. It is the opposite of a problem. It is what I was hoping was there. The room was quiet for a moment. He was aware that this was a different kind of conversation than they had been having, that there was a quality to it he had not been tracking with his standard operational overlay, and that the quality was real and required him to be present in a way that had nothing to do with the system. The shard is stable, he said. It is integrated fully. The system has designated it as a passive enhancement, and I do not anticipate any operational complications from it. I was not asking about complications, she said. I know. Another quiet moment. Thank you, she said. For last night. For doing it cleanly and doing it correctly, and for not getting any of my peerage killed. That was always the objective, he said. I know. Thank you anyway. He nodded. He stayed in the base for another hour, reviewing the evacuation data and updating the system's co-threat map with the reduced fallen angel presence. And when he left, she was back at the research shelf with a different book, and neither of them said anything further about the shard or the fragment, or caring about things, and he walked back to school in time for the last 2 periods of the day. The system noted, with its usual precision, faction relationship, Gremory. Status, consolidated. The 48 hours elapsed. He did a final sweep of the industrial facility at the 50-hour mark, running Kaga through the full building in a detailed reconnaissance pass. The facility was empty. No fallen angel energy signatures. No ritual components. No personnel. The stabilization array in the basement had been cleared, which was additional evidence of orderly departure rather than hasty retreat. Raynare had honored the terms. He filed this. Not as trust, exactly. As data. A demonstrated behavioral pattern in conditions of significant pressure. It was useful data. He stood in front of the empty facility and looked at it for a long moment. Then he moved on to the next item. There were 3 uncleared gate signatures remaining in Ko, residuals from the Nexus's activity that had opened before he closed the source. The Nexus elimination had stopped new gates from forming, but the 3 existing ones were independent systems now, no longer connected to the Nexus Authority's generation, and they would remain open until cleared. He had been letting them sit while the fallen angel's situation resolved. He cleared the first one that evening. It was rank C. It took him 22 minutes. He extracted 9 shadows from it, and brought his total to 47. He named one of the extracted shadows, a unit the system classified as Ambush Specialist, whose abilities in the gate had involved a particular quality of positional concealment that the system rated as tactically exceptional. He named it Kiri, and felt the 1.5x naming growth protocol apply. The second gate the following morning. Rank C with an elite variant modifier. 37 minutes. 6 extractions. Total, 53. He was level 25 when the second gate closed. The third gate he approached in the evening of the day after, and found it had changed. Chapter 11, The Gate That Spoke. Ko Eastern District. 3 days after the operation, the third gate had been rank C when the system first catalogued it. It was rank B now. He stood outside it in the alley behind the River District's old fish market, and looked at the changed readout, and let the system do its reassessment. Gate Fragment. Original classification, rank C. Current classification, rank B. Reclassification cause, internal environmental change. Entity count unknown. New notation, intelligent presence detected within. Presence is aware of external observation. Presence is attempting communication. He read that last line twice. The gate was trying to communicate with him. He looked at the gate. It looked like the others he had cleared, dark-edged and slightly luminous, the interior suggesting depth and texture beyond what the frame suggested. He had been looking at gates for 3 weeks and he had a good instinctual model for their atmospheric signature. This one felt different. Not dangerous in the way the Nexus had felt dangerous, that heavy accumulation of threat. Different in a way he did not have a ready category for. Kage, he said. Kage manifested beside him. Something inside is aware we are here. Standard entry formation. But do not engage unless I give the signal. Kage inclined its head. He went in. The interior was not stone corridors this time. It was a plain, open and wide and covered in something that was either grass or its equivalent in whatever dimension this gate connected to. The light was different, not the firelight or the cold colorless light of the other gates. This was a flat gray illumination with no apparent source, the quality of light before a storm. There were entities in the middle distance. A group of them, not spread in patrol formation, but standing together close, the way a group stands when it is waiting for something. He counted 22. The system revised, entities confirmed, 22. Classification, intelligent variant. Note: intelligent variant entities possess reasoning capacity equivalent to Haas-level cognitive function. Behavior, currently non-hostile. Posture, deliberate. Intelligent variant. He had not encountered that classification before. He walked toward them. Kage stayed at his shoulder. He did not deploy the line soldiers, because deploying the line soldiers would be a declaration of intent, and he did not yet know what intent was appropriate. The group of 22 stood and waited as he approached. They were roughly humanoid, taller than average, with a quality to their physical presence that the system tagged as elemental adjacent, which he understood to mean their physical form was partially constituted of something other than the biological materials that made up the entities in other gates. The one at the center of the group stepped forward when he was 10 meters away. It was taller than the others. The system assessed it separately. Intelligent variant. Designation, gate speaker. Function, interdimensional communication. Language translation, available through system. The gate speaker looked at him. Then it spoke, and the system translated the sounds into something his mind could process. You are the one who closed the Nexus. Not a question. Yes, he said. The gate speaker was quiet for a moment. We have been waiting for you to come to this place. We could not reach you through the other gates because the other gates held our enemies, and our enemies would have destroyed any message we attempted before it reached you. He looked at the 22 entities. He looked at their posture, which was the posture of people who had been waiting and were trying not to show how long. Who are your enemies? The Nexus Authority. Its kind. They are from a different dimension than we are. They found our gates and used them as infrastructure. They have been using our pathways to access your world for the last 2 years, and when we attempted to close our gates to stop them, They occupied our system and drove us into the margins. He stood very still while the system processed and translated. 2 years. The fallen angels had been in Ko for 18 months. The Nexus had been increasing gate frequency for what Rias had described as a recent acceleration. He was building a timeline in the system's tactical overlay as the gate speaker talked, mapping what he was hearing onto what he already knew. The gate entities from the rank D, C, and B gates he had cleared, the things he had fought and extracted, they were not from the same dimension as the intelligent variant group in front of him. They had been Nexus Authority entities using the native dimensions gate system as a bridge. He had cleared over 60 Nexus entities and extracted them as shadows. He had not cleared a single native entity. He felt the system update something in its classification database in real time. Retroactive classification update. All extracted entities from Gates 17 were Nexus Authority classification. Native dimension entity count, 0 engaged, 0 extracted. Current shadow formation, composition unchanged. Note, no action required. He exhaled. Then he looked at the gate speaker. You were waiting to tell me this, he said. Yes. We had to wait until the Nexus Authority was eliminated and the gate system was stable enough to allow a clear channel. What you closed was not our infrastructure. You freed it. What do you want from me? He asked. The gate speaker regarded him for a moment. We want to know if the one who closed the Nexus will prevent others from coming. There are other Nexus Authorities. The one in your world was an outpost. There is a primary installation in our dimension that we cannot close ourselves because the entities there are beyond our capacity. He thought about this. System assessment. Gate speaker communication is genuine. Intelligence credibility, high. New threat vector identified, Nexus primary installation. Dimensional location, unknown. Classification, rank S equivalent. Rank S. He was level 25. He looked at the gate speaker. I cannot address a rank S installation at my current operational level, he said. I need time. The gate speaker was still. How much time? He ran the leveling calculation. Level 25 to the level he would need for a rank S engagement. The curve. The available resources in Ko and whatever gates remained accessible. The Holy Grail shards enhancement to his regeneration and his formation's durability. I do not know yet, he said. But I will come back to this gate when I have an answer. Can you keep this channel open? The gate speaker looked at him. We have been keeping it open for 3 weeks. We can keep it open longer. He nodded. Then I will be back, he said. He walked out of the gate with Kage and stood in the alley behind the fish market in the late evening light, and let the system update his strategic map with the new threat vector. The map now had a new notation at its edge, at the limit of what the system could currently place with confidence. Beyond current operational range. Threat class, rank S, status, future objective. He looked at it. The endpoint was still not visible. The curve was still climbing. He walked home. Chapter 12, What the Peerage Became. Ko Academy. 2 weeks later. The rating game invitation arrived on a Tuesday. He was in homeroom when Rias sent it through the relay stone, a communication that arrived as a faint pulse against his left hand where the stone sat in his pocket. He waited until the break between second and third period to read it in full. The invitation was from the Citri peerage. Sona Citri, heiress to the House of Citri and the second great devil clan in Ko, was requesting a rating game against the Gremory peerage. The message was formally structured, the kind of formal structure that Devil Society used for official challenges, with the precise language and the deadline for response that Rias had explained to him as standard procedure. The deadline was 3 days. He put the stone back in his pocket and went to class. At lunch he went to the Gremory base. The full peerage was already assembled when he arrived, which meant Rias had sent notifications to everyone simultaneously, and he had simply been the last to arrive. He was aware that arriving last was information about how the relay stone protocol was calibrated, that Rias had sent to her existing peerage members first and to him second, and he noted this not as an issue but as an accurate reflection of the current relational topology. He was new. He was capable. He was not yet fully embedded in the institutional rhythm of how the Gremory peerage operated, and Rias was managing that distinction with a care that he found appropriate. You have all read the challenge, Rias said when he sat down. He had not, in fact, read the formal challenge document, only the relay summary. He pulled up the full text through the system's communication relay archive while she was talking and skimmed it in the time it took her to introduce the context. Raiding games were how Devil society resolved disputes of territory and status. Two peerages competed in a structured combat environment under rules designed by the Devil governing body. The game had specific parameters, team versus team, within a designated field, with the objective of eliminating the opposing team's king. Standard chess rules mapped onto combat. The Citri peerage is strong, Rias said. Sona is one of the most tactically sophisticated players in the young Devil circuit. Her queen, Tsubaki Shinra, is exceptional at reinforcement and defensive play. Their formation prioritizes control over aggression, which means any game against them is won or lost on strategic depth, not raw power. She looked at Issei at the end of this. He was aware she was looking at him. You have reviewed the available data on the Citri peerage, he said. It was not a question. Extensively, she said. I have been preparing for the possibility of this challenge for 2 years. He looked at the strategy table. At the top, a graphical map that was still marked from the industrial facility operation. Can I have access to everything you have on the Citri peerage formation? He asked. Personnel profiles, combat assessment records, known tactical tendencies, anything from previous raiding game observations. Rias looked at him. You are going to plan this, she said. I would like to contribute to the plan, he said. The final decision on how we play is yours. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, everything I have is yours. He spent the next 6 hours reading it. The Citri peerage data was extensive and well organized, which was not surprising given the source. Rias had been a methodical intelligence gatherer for 2 years and the records showed it. Detailed combat profiles for every member of the Citri peerage, analysis of their formation choices in 4 previous raiding games, notes on Sona Citri's decision patterns under pressure. He built a model. The system helped. It took the data he fed it and ran probability assessments on formation matchups, flagged the 3 scenarios in which the Citri formation's control priority style would be most effective against the Gremory peerage's power priority style, and identified 2 tactical patterns in Sona Citri's previous game records that suggested a specific tendency under time pressure. He wrote a plan. It was 4 pages in the system's notation format, which he manifested as a visible overlay and walked through with Rias the following morning. She read it without interrupting him, which was a quality he had come to value in her, the ability to absorb a complete argument before responding to any part of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You are not planning to participate in the primary engagement, she said. No. You are planning to hold the anchor position. The anchor position in your plan forces Sona to choose between 2 equally bad options within the first 8 minutes of the game. The choice she is most likely to make, based on her pattern from the 3rd previous game when she faced a similar bifurcation, will commit her formation to a configuration that Kiba and Akeno can exploit on the left flank. My anchor position forces that choice. If I am not at the anchor, she has a 3rd option and the bifurcation does not work. Rias looked at the plan. And if she chooses differently than her pattern suggests, then we adapt. The plan has 3 contingency branches for non-standard responses. She turned to the 3rd contingency page. She read it. This contingency puts you in direct engagement with Tsubaki, she said. Yes. If the primary and secondary branches fail, direct engagement with the Citri Queen is the fastest path to the resolution condition. Tsubaki's defensive reinforcement is formidable, but it is optimized for blocking power class attacks. The system has a different approach. Rias looked at him. You have fought a rank A entity. You cleared a nexus. You absorbed a Longinus shard. She said these things in a flat, factual register. A raiding game queen is within your current capacity. Yes. Then why are you putting yourself in the anchor and not the primary engagement? Because the anchor is where the plan needs me. Not where my power level is highest. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, that is a sentence I did not expect to hear from someone at your level. Operational placement should match operational need, he said. My power is a resource. I deploy resources where the plan requires them. Rias looked at the plan for a long moment. Then she looked at him. We accept the challenge, she said. He trained with the peerage for 6 days before the game. The training was different from his solo drills with the shadow formation. The Gremory peerage was a team, and teams had interaction dynamics that solo operations did not have, communication rhythms and spatial relationships, and the particular kind of trust that forms between people who have practiced being in danger together. He was new to this particular team. He handled this by doing what he always did: he observed and he learned. He ran drills with Akeno first because her operational profile was the one most directly adjacent to his anchor position's function, and he needed to understand her timing in the way that a functional plan requires you to understand the timing of the people the plan depends on. Akeno was precise. She had a quality in combat that he had not fully registered in the industrial facility operation, where the operational tempo had been fast enough that individual timing was less visible. In the slower rhythm of drills, he could see that she was not just fast, she was calibrated, that her attack decisions were made with the kind of data processing speed that he recognized as high intelligence in the system's framework, even though she did not have a system. She noticed him noticing. "You are analyzing my timing," she said, after the third drill. "Yes. Is it useful?" "Very. You process threat geometry at approximately twice the speed of standard devil reaction time. Your left side response is slightly faster than your right, which suggests your dominant strategic hemisphere is right-sided. The plan already accounts for your having a left-side attack advantage, but knowing the basis for it means I can adjust the anchor spacing accordingly." She looked at him. "That is a very detailed thing to observe about someone in 3 drills," she said. "It is what the system does," he said. "It watches things carefully." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you watch everything that carefully?" "Everything relevant to the plan," he said. She seemed to consider this. "And outside the plan?" He looked at her. She was looking at him with an expression that he was not classifying through the system's tactical overlay, because tactical overlay was not the right instrument for what the expression was doing. It was asking something, in the way expressions ask things, in the space under the surface of the words. "I watch things carefully generally," he said. "It is not always the system." She held the expression for a moment, and then nodded, once, and picked up her training stance again. The drill continued. He noted, in the section of his attention that was not the system, that the conversation had been a real one and had been about something real, and that he had answered honestly, and that this was different from how he had been operating for the past month, and that the difference was not unwelcome. He trained with Kaneko on the 4th day. Training with Kaneko toujours was an education in a specific kind of efficiency. She was not a complex fighter. She did not use feints or tactical depth or the kind of layered decision-making that Akeno deployed, or that the system ran constantly in his overlay. She was direct, precise, and sufficiently strong that the directness and precision were entirely adequate. He sparred with her for 20 minutes and came away with a clear picture. Kaneko's strength was at a level that would have been categorically overwhelming for the Issei Hyoudou of 5 weeks ago, and was currently a significant but manageable pressure. She was not trying to test his limit. She was training at a level appropriate for her own development, while giving him a genuine physical opponent to work against. After the spar, she sat on the edge of the training mats, and ate something from a small paper bag she had had in her jacket pocket. "You fight like a machine," she said. "Not critically. Observationally. I have a system that processes combat data," he said. "I know. But most people with a lot of power fight like people with a lot of power. You fight like someone trying to win with the minimum necessary." He sat on the opposite edge of the training mat. "That is the correct objective," he said. "I know," she said. "I am saying I notice it. Most people do not operate that way." He looked at her. Kaneko toujours was, he had determined over the past several weeks, the most direct person in the Gremory peerage. Rias was careful and layered. Akeno operated through a composure that had depth beneath it. Kiba was courteous in a way that involved distance. Kaneko simply said what she observed, in the language of what she observed, without decoration. He found this easy to work with. "How long have you been with the peerage?" he asked. She considered. 2 years, she said. "Since I was 12. Rias found you?" "She came to find me. I was not in a good situation." She said this without apparent weight, the way she said most things, as though the events of the past were simply data rather than burdens. He recognized this. He had built something similar over the past 5 weeks, a relationship with his own past that treated it as information rather than injury. She is worth the loyalty, he said. It was not a question. Kaneko looked at him. Yes, she said. She does not ask for things she would not give herself. He nodded. He thought about this assessment over the rest of the training day. He thought about it while he was running the formation drills with his shadow soldiers in the evening, and while he was reviewing the raiding game plan for the 8th time. She does not ask for things she would not give herself. He thought about the 24-hour notice. About the terms she had asked for. About the way she had held his gaze after the nexus without flinching from the scale of what he had become. He filed it in the section of his attention that was not the system. Chapter 13. The Raiding Game. The Game Field. Saturday morning. The raiding game field was generated by devil magic and manifested as a replica of a portion of Ko Academy rendered in accurate detail, which was an interesting choice that he recognized as Sona Citri's home territory always favored the player with more familiarity with the terrain, and the Citri peerage had been at Ko longer than the Gremory peerage had included Issei Hyoudou. It was a good choice. He noted it as evidence that the profile data on Sona Citri was accurate. He stood at the Gremory deployment point in the game field, which was the replica of the old school building, and looked at the space around him while the game's opening protocols completed. He had the system map active and was building a real-time picture of the field's terrain against the plan's movement requirements. The anchor position was the old building's rooftop. Elevated, with clear sight lines to both flanks, access to the central yard below, and defensible on 3 sides by the building's own architecture. In the plan it was the position that forced Sona's bifurcation by being simultaneously a threat to her queen's approach vector, and her king's defensive retreat path. He went up. Kage followed in phase state. The line soldiers he had not deployed for this operation. Raiding games were a devil institutional framework, and he had made a judgment that deploying the shadow formation within the game's rules would complicate the institutional relationship in ways that were not operationally necessary given the plan's structure. He had discussed this with Rias, and she had agreed. So it was him, and Kage, and the system. The game initiated. The first 8 minutes went exactly as the plan projected. The Citri formation moved from their deployment point with the patient, methodical advance that Sona Citri's previous games had established as her opening pattern. 2 bishops forward in a support configuration, 2 knights providing mobile coverage, rooks anchoring the rear, queen forward right at medium range. It was a textbook control priority opening. He watched it from the rooftop through the system overlay, and he watched Rias advance the Gremory formation from the new building position in the pattern he had specified. Kaneko forward left at maximum speed to press the Citri flank, Kiba holding the center, Akeno elevated on the gymnasium roof maintaining pressure on the Citri queen's approach vector. The bifurcation appeared at the 7-minute mark. Sona Citri's formation was facing 2 simultaneous pressures. Kaneko's aggressive forward movement threatening the Citri King's left side retreat, and the rooftop anchor position threatening the Citri Queen's optimal advance line. Sona needed to respond to both. She could not respond to both optimally. She chose to address the Kaneko pressure, which was the choice his pattern analysis had indicated as more probable. She redirected her queen toward the left flank to counter Kaneko, which left the Citri King's retreat path anchored only by the 2 rooks. He issued the signal to Akeno through the relay stone. Akeno left the gymnasium roof and moved into the center approach vector that the redirected Citri Queen had just vacated. She moved at the speed he had calibrated during their drills, precise and fast, and the Citri rooks saw her coming and engaged. 2 rooks. 1 Akeno. He watched the engagement from the rooftop with the system overlay tracking everything. Akeno was operating at the combat tempo she had shown in drills. The left side advantage he had noted, the process geometry of threat assessment that made her faster than her raw speed alone would account for. She handled 1 rook in 90 seconds. The second rook was significantly more capable. It pressed her hard and she held her ground rather than advancing, which was correct, which kept her in the position that the plan needed rather than being pushed into a configuration that would break the approach vector. He came off the roof, not charging. Moving at operational tempo, through the old building and down through the central yard, entering the engagement zone from a direction the Citri formation had not been tracking because the anchor position's function was to be a threat that shaped movement rather than a combatant who participated in movement. The second rook registered him when he was 20 meters away. It turned from Akeno. He hit it once, with the boost active, in the structural joint. It went down. Akeno looked at him from where she was standing. He looked at the path ahead of them, which led directly to the Citri King's retreat zone. Left flank, he said. Kiba is cutting the right. Kaneko has the forward. Rias goes center. She nodded. They moved. The raiding game resolved at the 31-minute mark. Rias reached the Citri King's position with Kiba having neutralized the last mobile Citri piece, and the king, Sona Citri herself, raised her hand in the concession gesture that the game rules designated as a formal acknowledgement. The field dissolved. They were back in the Gremory base, in the physical space where the relay infrastructure for the game had been established. The transition was instantaneous and slightly disorienting for the brief moment before the system recalibrated his spatial orientation. Rias was standing in the center of the room with an expression that was composed and dignified, and underneath it was something that moved, and he thought it was probably something in the category of relief. Kaneko was eating from her paper bag again. Kiba was cleaning the long blade with the same methodical care he had given it during the pre-operation preparation. Akeno was looking at him. He did not examine the look in detail at that moment. He noted its existence and filed it. Well done, Rias said. All of you. She looked at him specifically on the last two words. The plan held, he said. The plan held because the execution was correct, she said. That is your contribution. He did not argue with this. Later, after the formal post-game protocols with the Citri peerage, in which Sona Citri acknowledged the loss with a precision that suggested she had already begun her post-analysis and was operating from its conclusions, Rias found him on the roof of the old building where the anchor position had been. He was looking at Ko. The town below was ordinary in the way towns are ordinary from a height, the evening lights coming on, the specific geography of streets and buildings that looked different from above than from within. Sona will ask for a rematch, Rias said. I know. She was analyzing the game during the concession. She already knows what she would change. Can we win the rematch? He thought about this. Yes. But it will be different. She will have accounted for the bifurcation. The next plan will need to be built from different premises. Rias stood beside him and looked at the town. You enjoy this, she said. The planning? The systems? Yes, he said. It is not only the system, she said. It is you. He considered this. The system built a framework, he said. I was already the kind of person who would use it this way. She nodded. They stood in the early evening on the old building roof and looked at Ko, and below them the town was quiet, and somewhere at the edge of the system's map the notation for the rank S future objective blinked patiently, and the level curve continued its patient arc toward a ceiling that was not yet visible. The curve was always climbing. This was the one constant he had found in 5 weeks of a life that had changed entirely. He would keep climbing with it. Chapter 14. The Dragon and the Sovereign. Ko. The first day of November. Drake spoke more now. This had been a gradual shift, beginning in the days after the industrial facility operation and increasing steadily as the Holy Grail shards integration settled. The dragon had been almost entirely silent in the first 2 weeks after activation, offering only the specific tactical notations he had come to recognize as Drake's voice at the moments of most relevance. Since the shard, the notations had lengthened. The observations had become more frequent and more conversational. He had started responding to them the same way. It was, he had decided, a relationship. Not a tool relationship, where one party uses and the other is used. A genuine one, with the specific character of something that had been alone for a very long time and found itself no longer alone, and was doing the work of learning how to be otherwise. Partner, Drake said, on the first morning of November, while he was sitting at his desk reviewing the system's updated threat map. You are thinking about the gate speaker. Yes, he said. Rank S is not a designation I have seen survived by many. I am level 25. My current ceiling on confronting a rank S is not visible yet. The system cannot project an endpoint. Yes. That is what I find encouraging about you. Most people look at a ceiling they cannot see and feel fear. You look at it, and see the space to grow into. He thought about this. I feel fear, he said. I have felt it in every gate. It is a useful input. Fear tells you where the actual edge is. A pause. That is a mature understanding of fear for someone who is 17. I died at 17, he said. That accelerates certain understandings. The gem pulsed with the quality he had come to recognize as Drake's version of a laugh. Indeed it does. He looked at the threat map. The rank S notation at the edge. The empty spaces between level 25 and wherever the engagement point would need to be. Drake, he said. Yes. Do you know what I am going to become? A long pause. Longer than usual. The gem was warm against his left arm. Something the world has not seen before. The system plus the boosted gear plus the Holy Grail shard plus the Shadow Monarch framework. Each of those things alone is exceptional. Together they are not simply additive. They are catalytic. I have existed for a very long time and I have never seen a combination like this. He was quiet for a moment. Is that why Raynare killed me? I believe so. She detected the sacred gear before it activated. She detected something else as well, the system's latent architecture, which to certain kinds of sensitive perception would have appeared as a disruption in the natural order. The kind of disruption that precedes something large. He looked at his left hand. She was right, he said. Yes. She was right about what you were going to become. She was wrong about the correct response to it. He nodded. He put the threat map away and opened his school bag and found the mathematics homework he had not done and began doing it. Because the rating game was over and the rank S installation was a future objective and in the present moment he was 17 and had a mathematics assignment due Thursday. The mundane world continued regardless of what was building inside him. He had learned to let it continue. It was grounding in a way that nothing else was. The specific gravity of ordinary obligations that kept him tethered to the human scale of things while the system built him into something that operated at a different scale entirely. He finished the mathematics homework. Then he opened the system and reviewed the leveling projections for the next 2 weeks. The curve was patient and exact and unambiguous. He was going to be ready for what came next. The Gremory Peerage met on Friday evening for a planning session that was not about a specific operation. Rias had called it a review. A look at where they were and where they were going and what the structure of the peerage's activity looked like in the next month, given the Fallen Angel withdrawal, the gate clearances, the rating game victory, and the new threat vector that Issei had briefed them on after the Gates speaker conversation. He had told them about the Gates speaker at the first opportunity after processing the intelligence fully. He had presented it the way he presented everything, as data, with the system's assessment appended, with his own analysis of credibility and implications. The room had been quiet in the specific way it was quiet when it was processing something that significantly revised the known scale of a problem. Kaneko had said, "So there is something bigger coming." He had said yes. She had nodded and returned to her snack. At the Friday review, the Gate speaker's intelligence was on the agenda as the primary future planning item. They sat at the strategy table with the topographical map updated to include the dimensional notation at its edge, and Rias walked the peerage through the implications. The rank S installation exists in a connected dimension, she said. Its entities have been using the native gate system as infrastructure for transit into our world. With the Nexus Authority eliminated, that transit is currently disrupted. We have time. How much time? Kiba asked. Issei answered. The Gate speaker could not give a precise timeline. The Nexus Authority entities in the primary installation would not immediately know the co-outpost had been eliminated. Detection would depend on their communication methods, which the Gate speaker did not have complete information on. The estimate the Gate speaker had offered was weeks to months before a response could be mounted. Which means our preparation window is weeks to months, Rias said. Minimum, he said. Possibly longer. Rias looked at the map. What do you need for the preparation? He had already built this list. He had been building it since the Gate speaker conversation. 3 things, he said. Time to level. Access to any remaining Gate signatures in range for the extraction and experience. And information on the primary installation's internal structure, which I can only get from the Gate speaker, which means I need to return to that gate regularly. The Gate speaker seems cooperative, Akeno said. Yes. They want the same thing we do, the primary installation closed. They have been trying to close it from their side for 2 years without the capacity to do so. I am the first external entity to clear a Nexus authority in their system. They will cooperate. What about our allies? Rias asked. The Citri peerage. The devil governing body. The peace treaty factions. This is a threat that extends beyond Ko. He had thought about this too. It does extend beyond Ko, he said. And at the point where the preparation reaches the engagement threshold, broader alliance will be relevant. But the engagement itself, the rank S primary installation, cannot be a committee operation. Command clarity at the objective is essential. Too many decision-makers at the primary engagement breaks the response time advantage that is going to be our main operational lever against the rank S entity. Rias looked at him. You are saying you need to lead the objective. I am saying the objective requires a single command structure. I have the system. I have the shadow formation. I have the boosted gear and the shard. If anyone in this room or in this town is going to be at the center of a rank S engagement, the operational logic says it should be me. The room was quiet. Then Rias said very precisely, I agree. I will build the alliance context and the support structure. You prepare for the center. He nodded. Kiba said, then we have work to do. Kaneko was already eating. Akeno was looking at him again with the expression he had been filing. He met her eyes briefly and then looked at the map. There was a ceiling above them that was not yet visible. They were all going to grow toward it. He returned to the gate speaker's gate that evening. The intelligent variant entities were still there, still waiting with the patience of people who had been waiting for a long time and had learned that patience was the only available option. The gate speaker came forward when he appeared. You have returned. I have information needs, he said. For the preparation. I want to understand the primary installation's layout, its entity structure, what the Nexus authorities there are capable of individually and in formation, and what the native dimensions gate system looks like between here and the installation. The gate speaker looked at him for a moment. You are planning a route. Yes. You intend to go through our dimension. Is there a better path? A pause. No. The primary installation is not accessible from your dimension directly. The gate network is the only viable approach. But the gate network through our dimension passes through contested territory. The Nexus Authority entities from the outpost that was destroyed may have alerted others. The path will not be safe. I understand that, he said. Tell me about the path. I will determine what safe enough means. The gate speaker regarded him. Then it began to speak. He listened, and the system recorded everything, and he built the picture of a journey that was not yet within his reach but that was getting closer with every day, every level, every shadow extracted and named and integrated into the formation that was becoming something the system's notation language was still learning to describe. He was going to be ready. The only question was when ready arrived. He would know it when it did. Act 3, The Weight of Sovereignty. Chapters 15 through 24. Chapter 15. The Politics of Power. What descends from above. The notification arrived at 0314 on a Tuesday. Issei was already awake. He had been awake for 6 hours. Seated at the low desk, he had moved to the corner of his room beneath the window that faced the eastern tree line, working through the dimensional topology maps that Kage had assembled from 3 months of shadow relay reconnaissance. The maps were not physical documents. They existed only in the overlay that the system projected across his field of vision when he closed his eyes, a 3-dimensional lattice of pale blue lines representing confirmed gate boundaries, amber clusters marking active nexus sites, and the single deep red node that the gate speaker had designated as the primary installation. He had been measuring distances. Not in kilometers. In tolls. Every gate exacted something from the entities that passed through it. The system had taken 3 weeks to isolate the variable, but the pattern was clear once he understood what to look for. Living creatures lost coherence incrementally as they moved between dimensional layers. Shadows did not lose coherence because they were not alive in the conventional sense. They were extensions of his authority, anchored to his presence regardless of which layer they occupied. That asymmetry was the foundation of every tactical calculation he had made since the Nexus clearance. The notification pulsed once in the corner of his system overlay. It was not a gate alert. It was not a shadow status update. The icon was one he had catalogued but never seen activate, a small silver crown above a stylized set of scales. System notification, supernatural governance protocol initiated. A senior representative of the 72 Pillars of Hell requests formal audience regarding territorial anomalies detected in the co-metropolitan zone. Classification mandatory. Estimated arrival, 72 hours. Issei read it twice. Then he opened the secondary intelligence file he kept on Devil Political Structure and cross-referenced the phrase senior representative of the 72 Pillars. The phrase was deliberately imprecise. It could mean a mid-ranking emissary sent as a formality. It could mean a pillar lord in person. The word mandatory, however, was not imprecise at all. He closed the overlay and looked out the window. The treeline was dark. Somewhere in it, 3 of his shadows were running a perimeter rotation he had established after the Nexus clearance. A precaution that had cost him nothing and that he had not bothered to discontinue. 72 hours. He had work to do. The briefing. He assembled the peerage at 0600 in the Occult Research Club building. He had chosen that location deliberately rather than the Gremory territory's formal reception hall, because the club room carried a quality the reception hall did not. It was his workspace, and the distinction between someone else's home and his own operating environment mattered to him in ways he had stopped trying to articulate. Rias arrived first, which he had expected. She had the instinct of someone trained from childhood to treat early arrival as a statement. She wore a dark blazer over a deep red blouse, the school uniform adjusted toward formality with enough subtlety that it would not have registered to anyone who had not spent time studying how she calibrated her presentation. Issei registered it, wrote a brief note in the margin of his mental file, and pulled up the system overlay. "You have information," she said. It was not a question. Notification came at 0314. Mandatory audience, senior representative of the 72 Pillars, 72 hours. He let her process the word mandatory before he continued. "I need your read on which factions would use mandatory as a classification for an unannounced visit." Rias was quiet for 4 seconds. He had learned her pauses. 4 seconds meant she was genuinely thinking rather than choosing how much to say. Mandatory is a pillar convention reserved for situations where the requesting party believes they outrank the receiving party by a margin that makes negotiation a courtesy rather than a necessity. My father would use it for a direct summons to a Gremory territorial lord, not for a representative visiting a peerage member. She paused again. Someone is testing the classification of your status. That's what I thought. Akeno arrived with Kaneko. Kiba came in 30 seconds behind them. Asia reached the room last, slightly out of breath, holding a small notebook she had taken to carrying since the raiding game. She had started documenting operational discussions in longhand. He had not asked her to. She had begun on her own initiative, and he had decided it was an asset rather than an eccentricity. He ran the briefing in 18 minutes. He gave them the notification text, the arrival window, his working theory on the classification signal, and 3 possible visitor identities ranked by probability. When he was finished, he gave them the floor. Kiba spoke first. If it's a pillar lord in person, they will expect a formal reception space. Using this room is a statement. Yes. You intend to keep it. I intend to make the decision consciously rather than by default. Issei looked at Rias. Your read. Rias considered the room around her, the cluttered bookshelves, the low table that served as a conference surface, the window through which gray morning light was beginning to enter. She knew what it looked like to outside eyes. She also knew, by now, what it meant that Issei had built his operational rhythm here rather than anywhere that would have been offered to him. Keep the room, she said. But let me be present. If they are testing classification, your political context matters. Agreed. He dismissed the peerage to their morning schedules and spent the next 4 hours building the reception protocol. It was not elaborate. Elaborate would have suggested uncertainty. He planned for 3 contingencies: a formal envoy with a political message, a pillar lord with an ultimatum, and a 3rd category he labeled information extraction, which was the visit designed to learn more than it delivered. He prepared a different response sequence for each. Then he went to class, because the school day had started and he had a mathematics examination at second period that he had prepared for on Tuesday, and saw no reason to miss. Lord Bale. The visitor arrived 11 hours early. Issei was in the middle of afternoon combat training with Kage and Sen when the outermost shadow on the perimeter rotation pulsed the high priority alert. He stopped mid-movement, told Sen to hold position, and pulled up the alert. 2 individuals had entered the co-territorial boundary using a conventional teleportation circle, which meant they had either obtained territorial access credentials from the Gremory House or had used a transit method that circumvented the credential requirement entirely. The second option meant either very high authority or very sophisticated technical capability. The system had flagged both figures as supernatural entities of significant power, and it had tagged one of them with a classification he had not seen before, a deep violet indicator labeled Pillar Class Sovereignty. He relayed instructions to Kage through the Shadow Link, sent an alert to Rias's communication crystal, and changed out of his training clothes in under 4 minutes. By the time he reached the club room, Rias was already there. She had changed as well. The formality in her presentation had increased by a degree that told him she had identified the visitor before she arrived. Serorg Bale, she said when he walked in. Issei filed the name. Relationship to you, cousin. He is the heir apparent to the House of Bale, the strongest of the 72 pillars. He does not have a sacred gear. He built everything he has through physical training alone. She said the last sentence with a quality he had learned to identify as respect that she had not chosen to feel but could not suppress. He came early. Serorg does things in his own time. It is not disrespect. It is the way he moves through the world. Understood. The door opened without a knock. The man who entered was large in the way that geological formations are large, not dramatically, but undeniably. He stood several centimeters taller than Issei, broad through the shoulders in a manner that his dark formal coat did not entirely conceal, with short dark hair and an expression that occupied the space between serious and genuinely curious. His eyes moved through the room in a single sweep that catalogued everything and dismissed nothing. Behind him stood a young woman in formal attendant dress, holding a leather document case, her expression carefully neutral. Serorg Bale looked at Rias. Cousin. Then he looked at Issei with the specific quality of attention that people give to things they have been thinking about before they see them. Shadow Sovereign of Ko. Issei did not react to the title. He had not heard it used aloud before. The system had assigned it as a classification tag weeks ago, but it had not appeared in any communication he had received from any external party. He noted the information, stored it, and held the silence for one full beat. Lord Bale, he said. You arrived early. I did, Serorg agreed. He did not apologize. He glanced at the room around him, the bookshelves, the low table, the training area visible through the inner door. He seemed to find it interesting rather than inadequate. I wanted to see what kind of space a person who cleared a rank A nexus in single assault builds for himself. And it makes sense. He moved to the table with a directness that was not aggression and sat without being invited, which was a statement of its own but not a hostile one. Sit with me. Issei sat. Rias took a position at his right. The attendant placed the document case on the table and stepped back. I am here in an official capacity, Serorg said, which means I have a document to deliver and a formal position to convey. I will do that. But I am also here because I wanted to. He looked at Issei directly. I have been watching the gate activity reports for the past 3 months. Your clearance rate is not possible for a standard devil peerage. The Nexus Authority extraction you perform does not correspond to any known technique in the Underworld's recorded literature. He paused. What are you? The question was not hostile. It was the question of someone who genuinely wanted to know, and was experienced enough with power to ask it plainly. Issei considered his response for 2 seconds. A hunter, he said. With a system that grows proportional to what I engage, and the shadows, extractions from defeated opponents. They serve under a permanent authority link. He met Bale's gaze. Currently 53. 4 designated generals. Serorg was quiet. Then something crossed his expression that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family. The formal document first, he said. Then I want to spar. The document. The document was 3 pages of formal devil political language, dense with subordinate clauses and conditional phrasing, and it said the following things when stripped to their operational meaning. The 72 pillars had taken note of the anomalous gate activity in the co-zone. They had determined that the activity was not demonic in origin and not angelic in origin and did not correspond to any existing faction. They were formally requesting a classification determination for the entity identified as operating from Co. Until that determination was complete, they were extending provisional recognition as an independent territorial actor, which meant neither ally nor enemy, with expectations of quarterly information exchange regarding gate-related developments that could affect Underworld stability. Issei read it twice. Quarterly exchange means they want to know what I find without committing to assistance if I need it. Yes, Serorg said. It is a standard provisional framework. It gives the pillars information and gives you time without requiring either party to make a commitment they cannot yet evaluate. And the classification determination. That is the political question that no one wants to decide first. If you are classified as a devil subordinate, your activity falls under the authority of whatever house you are associated with. If you are classified as independent, you acquire rights and obligations that come with territorial sovereignty. He looked at Issei steadily. What do you want to be classified as? Independent, Issei said. He said it without hesitation because he had reached the answer 3 weeks ago, when he first saw the system classification tag appear in the overlay. Serorg nodded slowly. Then you will want a formal advocate in the Pillar Assembly. Classification disputes require sponsorship. He was quiet for a moment. I will sponsor it. Rias drew breath. She did not speak. But Issei registered the significance in the sound. Why, Issei said. Because someone who cleared a rank A nexus alone and is currently mapping what sounds like an installation beyond the gate network deserves to be classified correctly. And because the Pillar Assembly makes better decisions when the things it classifies are accurately described. He said it with the matter-of-fact quality of someone who had made a decision through a clear process and was done deliberating. Also, I want to spar. You said that. I meant it both times. Chapter 16. What strength recognizes? The training ground. They used the east field behind the old gymnasium, the same space Issei had cleared of undergrowth 3 weeks into his tenure with the Gremory peerage when he had needed a surface that would absorb impact without structural consequence. The field was approximately 40 meters by 30, bordered on 2 sides by treeline and on the third by a low stone wall that belonged to a property the Gremory house held in Koa's residential quarter. Serorg's attendant, whose name was Keisha Abaddon, stood at the wall's edge with the document case, and the specific patience of someone who had watched Serorg spar many times and had calibrated her distance accordingly. Rias stood near her. She had not been asked to leave and had not offered to. Issei had not minded. He had placed Sun and Tetsu at the treeline in passive observation mode, not as a tactical measure but because having them present was operationally automatic at this point. Rules, Serorg said. He had removed his coat. The athletic build beneath it was unsurprising. No extraction, Issei said. Stopping conditions at your word or mine. I won't hold back on output, but I'll modulate impact at contact. Same. Serorg rolled his right shoulder once. I want to see the system in operation. Not just the result. Issei nodded. He pulled up the overlay and ran a pre-engagement scan. His current stats after level 25 and the 3 gates cleared in the 11 days following the raiding game were measurable, and he had memorized them the way a craftsman memorizes the specifications of a tool. Strength at this level exceeded what the Gremory peerage could match individually, with the exception of Rias at full destructive power output. Speed was faster than any baseline devil at equivalent age. Endurance was the variable that most surprised visitors, because it did not degrade the way biological endurance did. The Shadow Monarch passive layered a regenerative effect across sustained output that made attrition strategies ineffective against him. Serorg Bale, however, was not a visitor. He was the heir apparent of the strongest pillar. The system's combat assessment, which Issei had learned to read as a calibrated estimate rather than a certainty, placed Bale at a level that would have been categorized as ultra-high danger 8 weeks ago. Now the assessment showed something more interesting. It showed approximately equal. They started without a signal. Serorg moved first, crossing 10 meters in a time that would have been impossible for anyone not built specifically for combat, his right fist driving forward at an angle that was precise rather than wild. Issei read the trajectory from the first planted step and moved laterally, not backward, putting himself 90 degrees off the line of force and letting the strike pass close enough that he felt the air displacement against his face. He responded with 3 rapid strikes to the midsection. Serorg absorbed all 3 and returned a left-hand sequence that Issei blocked across the forearms, the impact jarring through bone in a way that told him the output level was genuine rather than restrained. He increased his own output by 12%. The next 3 exchanges happened in under 4 seconds and covered most of the field's eastern half. Issei used the shadow step that the system had classified as a monarch movement technique, a lateral displacement that passed through a thin layer of shadow dimension and emerged at a point 2 meters removed from the entry. Serorg tracked it. He should not have been able to track it. He tracked it because he had apparently anticipated the exit angle from the entry position, which meant his combat intelligence was operating at a level that Issei had not assigned to him based on the political briefing. He updated the file mentally. Serorg Bale was smarter in a fight than he appeared in a room. They reset to standing distance. Both of them were breathing harder. Serorg's expression had shifted from curious to something more focused and pleased. The shadow step, he said. You enter and exit at predictable geometry. I know, Issei said. I'm fixing it. It will be harder to fix than you think. The entry-to-exit geometry is a function of momentum conservation, not technique. He said it without condescension, as a technical observation. Your strength scaling is real. I can feel each exchange. You're slightly stronger than the last one. Yes. Drake. Yes. Serorg considered this. A dragon emperor's boosting combined with a monarch's authority. Each of those alone would be categorized as a world-class combat asset. He looked at Issei with the directness that had characterized everything about him since he walked through the door. Together, I don't know what ceiling you have. Neither do I, Issei said. That's the most accurate thing anyone has said about it. What Drake said after? They ran 2 more extended exchanges before calling the session. When it ended, Serorg was breathing deliberately, the controlled respiration of someone managing a high-output state, and Issei's forearms had a deep bruising that the Shadow Monarch regeneration would clear within the hour. Either of them had gone down. The field had 3 newly depressed patches of earth, and 1 cracked section of stone wall that Keisha Abada noted in a small ledger without visible reaction. After Serorg had accepted water from his attendant, and the immediate post-combat processing had settled, he looked at Rias. Your peerage chose well, he said. Rias met his gaze with the composure she had built through years of political training. He chose his own terms. Even better. Serorg pulled his coat back on and looked at Issei. I'll file the sponsorship petition on my return. Classification proceedings take between 2 and 4 weeks depending on assembly scheduling. You'll receive formal notification when it's complete. He picked up the document case from Keisha. What you're doing with the gates matters. The Underworld has been aware of the network for decades and has not found a viable method of consistent clearance. If the primary installation is what the speaker entity implies, it will matter to everyone. I know, Issei said. Good. Serorg nodded once, the gesture carrying a quality of finality that was not dismissal but completion. I'll come back. We have more work to do on the shadow step geometry. He left with Keisha and a conventional teleportation circle that opened in the field and closed without residue. Rias stood very still for a moment after the light faded. He never compliments peerages, she said. In 12 years of public life at pillar functions, I have never heard him compliment a peerage. Issei looked at the 3 depressions in the field. He was already calculating the shadow step geometry problem, running it against the momentum conservation principle Serorg had identified. I'll want the field resurfaced before the next session, he said. I'm using it for generals training on Thursday. Rias looked at him. Something moved through her expression that was too layered to identify quickly. I'll have it done tomorrow, she said. He was already writing the geometry problem in the overlay, and Drake was already in the back of his awareness with the specific weight that meant the dragon had something to say, and was deciding how to say it. He waited until he was alone in his room. You are going to say something about the spar, he said. Drake's presence in the gauntlet was warm, not hot. It had been warm since the Holy Grail shard integration, which had changed the internal temperature of their shared space in a way that neither of them had fully mapped. Bale hit you harder than anything has hit you in 2 months, Drake said. Your reaction to it was satisfaction, not concern. It means the ceiling is further than I thought. Yes. The dragon was quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about the primary installation. What the gate speaker has indicated about its scale. Tell me. The installations beyond gate networks in the records I carry from previous hosts are not storage sites or strongholds in the conventional sense. They are processing centers. They are places where something is being done to dimensional fabric over a long period of time. Drake paused. The entities the gate speaker called invaders. They were not passing through the network. They were building toward something through it. Issei held this. Building toward what? I don't know. But I think the answer is at the installation. Then we go when we're ready. Yes, Drake said. And I think ready is closer than it was this morning. Chapter 17. The Shape of the Network. 47 days. In the 47 days between Serorg Bale's visit and the classification determination from the Pillar Assembly, Issei cleared 9 gates. He documented each one in the system's mission log with the precision that had become routine. Gate rank, entry time, clearance method, entity types encountered, casualties among shadow forces, extractions completed, and the dimensional signature reading that the system recorded automatically at the moment of clearance. The dimensional signatures were the piece of data he had begun prioritizing above all others, because they had started to show a pattern. Each gate, when cleared, produced a brief spike in dimensional coherence at the clearing point. The system logged this as a standard dimensional stabilization event. The gate's passage was sealed, the local fabric returned to baseline, and the reading normalized within 20 minutes. Standard routine, documented. Except that they were not normalizing independently. They were normalizing toward each other. He had noticed the first divergence from expected baseline in Gate 7 of the current sequence, a rank B site in the mountain district north of Ko that he had cleared on a Wednesday morning before school. The post-clearance signature had stabilized 11% above the regional baseline and had remained there. He had assumed instrument error at first, or a local anomaly in the mountain district's underlying geology, and had continued to the next gate. Gate 8, a rank C site near the old commercial district, had stabilized at 9% above baseline. Gate 9 had been 13%. He had pulled every signature reading from the beginning of his clearance record by the time he finished Gate 9's post-mission documentation, and the pattern was not subtle once all the data existed in a single display. The cleared gates formed a ring around the primary installation node on his map. Each clearance raised the dimensional coherence in that zone by a measurable increment. The ring was approximately 60% complete. He sat with this for a long time. The gates were not random. They had been placed in a pattern, and the pattern was oriented toward the primary installation. Clearing them was not merely removing obstacles from the path. It was doing something to the dimensional architecture around the installation. The question was whether that something was what the invaders had intended, or whether it was something else entirely. He assembled the generals in the Shadow Realm at 2,300 and briefed them. Kage absorbed the information without a visible response, which was typical. Tetsu's manifestation, a heavy-formed shadow with the solidity of compressed iron, shifted in a way that suggested processing. Sen's form, more fluid and angular, pulsed twice in the pattern Issei had learned to read as analytical engagement. Yumi's manifestation, the most humanoid of the 4, stood very still. New operational parameter, he told them. Every clearance from this point is also a mapping exercise. I want post-clearance signature data relayed to me within 10 minutes of gate seal. Sin, your designated signature analyst. I want a secondary verification process alongside the system's automatic log. Sen's form pulsed in acknowledgement. The remaining gates in the ring, 7 sites. I'm projecting a clearance window of 22 days if we maintain current pace. He looked at Kage. After the ring is complete, I want a full shadow relay reconnaissance push toward the installation boundary. I need to know what changes at the site when the ring closes. Kage's manifestation, a silhouette that moved like something cutting through water, inclined forward once. He dismissed them and ran the geometric analysis again. The ring, when complete, would create a boundary of clear dimensional space around the installation covering approximately 40 square kilometers of real-world geography. Every civilian and supernatural entity within that boundary lived within the influence radius of whatever the installation was doing to the fabric around it. Issei thought about that for a moment. Then he added a new category to his mission log, Civilian Impact Assessment, and he began filling it in. The Grail Shard speaks. The Holy Grail Shard had been quiet since its integration. Not dormant, the system's internal diagnostic registered its presence as a continuous, active contribution to his vitality regeneration and the Sovereign's grace extension, but quiet in the way that the other presences in his shared internal space were sometimes quiet, listening rather than absent. It had no voice in the way Drake had a voice. It communicated in something closer to imagery and weight, a quality of pressure in his awareness that carried meaning without words. He had learned to read it the way he had learned to read the system's nonverbal outputs, through pattern recognition and accumulated experience. On the night of the 42nd day after the classification proceedings began, he was running the ring analysis for the fourth time when the Grail Shard pulsed with a quality he had not felt before. Not urgency. Not alarm. Something that translated, imperfectly, as recognition. He set the analysis aside and gave it his attention. The imagery it offered was difficult to hold as a complete picture. It came in fragments, the way very old things sometimes communicated, as if the information had been stored in a format that predated the ability to transmit it whole. What he received was a sense of the installation as something that had existed long before the invaders found it. A structure that was not built from dimensional fabric but that had grown into it over time, like a crystal that forms within rock, following the geometry of the space around it. And the gates were not merely passage points between layers. They were, in their original configuration, something that the shard communicated as valves. Mechanisms for maintaining pressure equilibrium in dimensional fabric that would otherwise collapse under its own structural weight. The invaders had not built the gate network. They had found it. And they had been in the process of converting it from a pressure maintenance system into something that served their own purpose when the first of the sovereigns had appeared to stop them. He sat with this for a very long time. You know what the installation is, he said quietly. The shard pulsed again. Not exactly, it communicated. A fragment of a longer understanding, incomplete, but enough. The core of the original system, he said. Not an installation. A hub. The pressure shifted in a way that felt like agreement. He pulled up the ring map and looked at it with new information. The gates he was clearing were restoring the valves to their original function. Clearing them was not preparing the path to the installation. It was decompressing the dimensional fabric that the conversion process had been pressurizing for what might have been centuries. Then the ring doesn't open a path, he said slowly. It stabilizes the approach. The shard was quiet for a moment. Then it offered a single image, a door that could only be opened from within. Something at the hub has to recognize the pattern, he said. The ring doesn't give us access. It signals intent. He spent the next 6 hours rewriting his approach protocol from the ground up. Asia. She was waiting in the club room at 0615 when he came down, which was unusual. Asia was a morning person but not an early morning person. She had the notebook open on the table in front of her and a cup of tea that had gone lukewarm, which told him she had been there for a while. He made himself a cup of the tea she had left in the kettle and sat across from her. You have something to say, he said. I've been reading back through the notes, she said. She had careful handwriting, small and even, with the particular neatness of someone for whom writing had been a solitary pleasure for a long time. From the rating game briefing through last week's ring analysis, which I wrote up from what you explained at dinner. She looked up at him. You're getting ready for the hub. Yes. Are you going alone? He considered the question. It deserved a real answer. I don't know yet. The approach protocol depends on what the signal and recognize sequence requires. If it's a sovereign presence specifically, then adding non-sovereign entities to the approach changes the signal. And if the signal works regardless, then the question is tactical utility versus risk profile. The hub interior is unknown territory. I don't have enough reconnaissance data to calculate safe companion thresholds. Asia looked at him with the gentle directness that was specific to her. That's not what I'm asking. He met her gaze. He took a moment before he answered. I know, he said. I'll take the peerage. Not as support in the conventional sense. As the operational team they've become. Something settled in her expression. She wrote 2 lines in the notebook. Good, she said. He drank his tea. The notebook, he said after a moment. It's useful. She looked up again, slightly surprised. I wasn't sure if you noticed. I notice everything. I just don't always comment on it. He set the cup down. Keep doing it. She closed the notebook and held it with both hands, the way she held things she considered important. Okay, she said. Chapter 18, Classification. The Pillar Assembly's answer. The formal notification from the 72 pillars arrived on a Saturday, which surprised him only in its timing. Political documents in the devil governance structure were typically delivered on weekdays, during administrative hours, as a convention that carried its own meaning about the seriousness with which the sender regarded the content. A Saturday delivery meant either unusual urgency or a deliberate departure from convention. The seal on the notification was not the standard pillar assembly crest. It carried the personal seal of the House of Baal alongside the assembly crest, which told him Serorg had done more than sponsor the petition. He had shaped the language of the result. He read it twice, standing at the window. The classification determination was, Independent Territorial Sovereign, Co-Zone, Provisional Duration 12 months with Standard Review. The rights that came with the classification were enumerated across 2 pages. Formal recognition of his territorial claim to the Co-Zone, the right to negotiate directly with pillar houses without routing through the Gremory House, protection under standard non-aggression conventions that applied to sovereign territories, and most significantly, access to the Underworld's archived gate research, which had apparently accumulated across centuries of study and had never produced a viable clearance method but contained dimensional data that the system would find useful. The obligations were simpler. The quarterly information exchange Serorg had mentioned, notification of any gate activity that threatened the stability of adjacent devil territories, and a requirement to appear at 1 formal pillar assembly session per year for status review. He read the obligations section 3 times. They were modest. Deliberately modest. Someone had argued for modest obligations and won. He wrote a brief acknowledgement message in the formal pillar convention that he had studied from Rias's political documentation files and sent it through the crystal communication system before he went downstairs. What Rias said? He told the peerage at Saturday breakfast, which was an informal affair that had developed its own rhythm over the months. Akeno made the tea, Kaneko arranged whatever Rias had requested from the main house kitchen, Kiba sat nearest the window and read until the food arrived, and Asia kept the notebook on the table even when she was not actively writing in it. He placed the notification on the table and let them read. The room was quiet for longer than usual. Kiba spoke first. Independent Territorial Sovereign. He said it carefully, as if testing the weight of each word. That's not a classification the Assembly creates often. 4 times in the past 2 centuries, Rias said. She had finished reading before everyone else. Her expression was composed in the specific way of someone who had prepared for a possibility, and found that preparation did not make the reality feel quite like the preparation had suggested it would. 3 of the previous 4 were pillar houses undergoing territorial disputes. The 4th was a case involving a supernatural entity that the Assembly could not successfully categorize under any existing framework. Which category does this resemble? Kaneko said. It was not quite a question. The 4th, Rias said. Akeno looked at Issei across the table with an expression that was warm and precise at once. The access to archived gate research is significant. Yes. I'll request the archive transfer this week. The dimensional data may resolve the signal recognition question faster than independent calculation. And the formal sessions, Kiba said? 1 per year at the Pillar Assembly. You'll need political support for those. I'll have it, Issei said. Baal already indicated intent. A sponsoring lord at assembly sessions is standard for new sovereign classifications. He looked at Rias. She was looking at the notification document, not at him. The right to negotiate directly, she said quietly. Without routing through my house. Yes. She looked up. The expression on her face was the one she wore when she was being genuinely honest rather than diplomatically careful. My father will have an opinion about that. I would expect him to. He may contact you. Then I'll speak with him. He met her gaze. The classification changes the formal structure. It doesn't change anything else. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, and the expression shifted into something more settled. I know, she said. Kaneko had been eating steadily throughout this exchange. She swallowed, looked at Issei, and said, the ring? 7 gates left. Yes. Schedule. He pulled up the overlay. 14 days if conditions hold. I want to complete the ring before the archive transfer, then integrate the archive data into the approach protocol before we move on the hub. Total timeline, Kiba said. 25 to 30 days from today. The room processed this. The number was real in a way that previous timelines had not quite been, because the previous timelines had always contained an unknown quantity large enough to require revision. This one did not. Then we have 25 days to get ready, Akeno said. Yes. Good. She poured him a second cup of tea and set it in front of him with the quiet precision that characterized everything she did when she was being serious. Drink that. You've been awake since 3. He drank the tea. Chapter 19, The 7 Remaining. Gate 10. The 10th gate was in the basement of an abandoned textile factory in the industrial quarter 3 kilometers northeast of Koa's commercial center. It had been rank C when the system first identified it, but the updated scan he ran on approach showed it had escalated to rank B in the 22 days since initial identification, which meant the entities inside had been generating pressure against the dimensional membrane in ways that accelerated the local hierarchy. Escalation was not unusual. It was the natural tendency of gate ecosystems when left uncleared. The stronger entities consumed the weaker ones, the environment concentrated power, and the gate rose in rank as the average threat level inside it increased. He had cleared 3 escalated gates in the prior sequence, and had developed a modified entry protocol that accounted for the altered entity distribution. He took Kage and 8 standard shadows on this one. The factory basement had a structural layout that favored channeled approach rather than broad front clearance, and he wanted the shadow relay coverage complete before he stepped through the gate membrane. The membrane was old. He could tell by the texture. It had a density that newer gates lacked, a resistance at the threshold that required a deliberate push rather than a step through. He pushed through and let the gate environment settle around him. The interior was vast in the way that gate interiors were often at variance with their physical footprints. The basement had been perhaps 800 square meters, but the gate opened into something closer to a cavern 2 kilometers wide, with a ceiling lost in darkness and a floor of pale stone that absorbed sound rather than reflecting it. The air had the quality he associated with high-concentration dimensional energy, a slight pressure across the sinuses and a taste at the back of the throat that the system identified as dimensional residue, the byproduct of long-term gate activity in a confined space. There were 43 entities inside. He counted them through the shadow relay before he moved. The apex entity was a gate construct he had not seen in prior clearances, a dimensional anchor, which the system classified as a rank B apex type whose primary function was the maintenance of the gate's structural integrity from the interior. It was large, roughly spherical, composed of compressed dimensional material in a way that made it appear to breathe, and it was the reason this gate had not collapsed under the pressure of its own escalation. He targeted it last and worked inward from the perimeter. The clearance took 41 minutes. The dimensional anchor was the most interesting fight. It could not move independently, but it could project force at range by releasing dimensional compression in directed bursts, and the bursts were fast enough that he had to use the shadow step twice to avoid full contact impact. He spent 8 minutes on the anchor alone before he found the structural weakness in its compression pattern. It could not release and recharge simultaneously, and the recharge window was 1.3 seconds, which was enough. He hit it during the recharge 4 times, escalating output with each strike. The anchor dissolved on the 4th. The extraction from the anchor produced something he had not extracted before, a shadow that was not humanoid. It manifested as a sphere of compressed darkness approximately a meter in diameter, which rotated slowly on an axis that shifted as he watched. The system classified it as a spatial shadow, a non-combat designation indicating a shadow whose function was spatial rather than martial. He named it Orb and added it to the general's consideration list. A shadow that maintained spatial relationships had operational applications he had not previously had access to. The post-clearance signature reading was 16% above baseline. He noted this and moved to Gate 11. The accumulation. Gates 11 through 14 fell across 9 days. He varied the composition of the force he brought to each one based on the pre-entry scan, treating each clearance as a data point in the larger pattern rather than an isolated operation. By Gate 14 he had established a clearance protocol that the system had begun to assist automatically. It would generate a recommended force composition based on scan data and historical clearance performance, and he would review the recommendation and modify it based on factors the system could not assess. Primarily the shadow step geometry problem and his current read on how each general performed in the specific environmental conditions of the gate interior. He was getting faster. Not in the way that simple experience produces efficiency, but in the deeper way of someone whose capacity for rapid complex decision-making was itself growing. The system's intelligence upgrades were cumulative and nonlinear. Each level added to a foundation that made subsequent additions more powerful rather than merely more numerous. He had reached a point where tactical processing that had required 30 seconds of conscious effort 3 months ago now happened in the background while he was doing something else. This made him better. It also made him more aware of what he was becoming. He did not find this troubling. He found it worth monitoring. The archive from the Underworld arrived during the clearance of Gate 12, delivered through a formal channel that required him to sign 3 documents acknowledging the provisional nature of his classification and the expectation of quarterly exchange. He signed them and immediately began indexing the archive. It was large. 6 centuries of dimensional research, most of it organized by a classification system that predated his system's taxonomy and required a conversion layer before he could integrate it. He said Orb, whose spatial sensitivity had already proved useful in the shadow relay network, to assist in the indexing process. 3 days into the indexing, Orb flagged a section that the system had classified as anomalous, a cluster of research documents from approximately 200 years ago that referenced a dimensional structure described as a pressure hub, whose location corresponded within acceptable error margins to the coordinates the gate speaker had designated as the primary installation. The researchers had known it was there. They had studied it from a distance for 60 years without finding an entry method. The entry method they had not found was described in one of the document's final sections as theoretically requiring a sovereign class presence and a completed valve network. The researchers had noted this as a theoretical condition that was not achievable with existing entities and had suspended active study. He read that section 4 times. Then he called Rias. The conference. They met in the club room at 2200 with the full peerage and the archive section projected in the system overlay, which he had learned to share through the shadow link in a limited form that let others read the surface content without accessing the operational depth of the system itself. He gave them 8 minutes with the documents before he spoke. The entry condition is confirmed, he said. Sovereign class presence with completed valve network. The ring completes in 3 more gates. After that, the dimensional fabric around the hub will be in the state this research describes as the precondition. Kiba looked up from the archive section. The 200-year-old researchers reached the same conclusion and couldn't proceed because no sovereign class entity existed at the time. Correct. And now one does, Kaneko said. Yes. The interior Rias said. She had read faster than the others, or had focused on the most relevant section. The archive describes interior conditions as unknown beyond the entry threshold. They could model the approach but not the interior, which means, Akeno said carefully, that we are going somewhere the most sophisticated dimensional researchers in devil history could not go, and we do not know what is inside. Yes, Issei said. And we are going together, Asia said. It was not a question. Yes. She wrote something in the notebook. He did not ask what. Force composition, Kiba said, moving to operational footing the way he had learned to when the conceptual discussion had run its course. Do the archive entry conditions specify anything about non-sovereign entities accompanying the primary? No. The researchers modeled the approach as solo because they were theorizing from a sovereign class entity they didn't have. They didn't consider the companion question. Then we planned for full peerage entry with general support, Kiba said. That's the current plan, yes. Subject to what the final 2 gates show us about the ring's post-completion state. If completing the ring changes the hub's external readings significantly, I'll revise the force composition. Kaneko had the archive section on the spatial dimension projections. She read 3 lines, set it down, looked at Issei. You're going to extract something from inside, she said. If there's something to extract, yes. And if it's not an entity, she said. The archive calls it a pressure hub. The Grail shard called it a door that opens from within. If the thing inside is not an entity but a mechanism, she paused. What does a sovereign do with a mechanism? The room was quiet. I don't know yet, Issei said. That's why we're gathering information before we go. Kaneko nodded. She picked the archive section back up and continued reading. Chapter 20. The ring closes. Gates 15 and 16. He cleared Gate 15 on a clear morning, alone except for Kage and 4 standard shadows. The gate was rank B, elevated from its initial assessment of rank C, and was located in a narrow ravine in the hills east of Ko where the dimensional fabric had always been thin. He had noted the site in his earliest reconnaissance as a location of interest. The thinness was structural, not a consequence of gate activity, and it told him the fabric in this quadrant was older than the surrounding geography. The clearance was efficient. He had stopped tracking time on individual gates with the same precision he had used in the early months, not because time had become irrelevant, but because the decision quality on clearances had improved to the point where the timing was an output of good decisions rather than a variable he needed to optimize separately. The post-clearance signature was 21% above baseline. He stood in the ravine after the gate membrane dissolved and watched the dimensional fabric settle. This was something he had started doing after Gate 12, staying at the clearance site for 10 minutes after completion, observing the stabilization process directly rather than through the system's automated log. The system gave him the data. Watching gave him something harder to quantify. The fabric stabilized differently after the ring was nearly complete. The movements in it were more coordinated. The dimensional material behaved less like fluid finding its own level and more like something oriented toward a point. He could feel the orientation through the system's spatial awareness, a directional quality that his older reports had not contained. Everything was beginning to point toward the hub. He ran the calculation. 1 gate left. 16 sites cleared, each valve restored, each clearance adding to the coherence of the dimensional architecture in the co-zone. The ring was 94% complete, and its effects were already measurable in the hub's external readings, which Orb was monitoring through the shadow relay. The hub readings had been changing since Gate 14. The system classified the changes as dimensional decompression, which matched the Grail shard's pressure equilibrium model exactly. The final gate was rank A. He had known this since the initial mapping. The final site in the ring was the most powerful, positioned at the geometric apex of the valve network, and its escalation over the months of his clearance sequence had brought it from initial rank B to a confirmed rank A designation. It was the strongest gate he had faced since the Nexus. He planned its clearance with the same precision he had given the Nexus, and he gave himself 3 additional days of preparation after Gate 15. 3 days. On the first day he worked through the full Shadow Force inventory, 61 shadows including 4 generals and Orb, each assessed for current operational status, capability profile, and readiness for a rank A clearance, and the hub approach that would follow within 48 hours of ring completion. He spent 6 hours on this assessment, not because it required 6 hours, but because he found that the full attention given to each shadow produced a better accuracy than a rapid scan. He knew each of them. Not the way he had known people before the system, through accumulated shared experience and emotional response. He knew them through the authority link, which was its own kind of knowing, precise, complete, without interpretation or projection. Kage was the oldest of the extracted, and the authority link with Kage had a depth that the newer shadows did not yet carry. Tetsu was the strongest in direct physical output. Sun was the fastest processor. Yumi was the most adaptable. Orb was the most unusual, and its spatial function was still being mapped. He wrote a 2-page assessment of each general and filed it in the operational archive he was maintaining alongside the system's automatic log. The system's log was accurate and complete. The assessments were his own read, which was a different thing. On the second day he worked with Drake. This had become a regular practice over the past month, a deliberate internal session, not triggered by battle or crisis, but chosen, the same way he chose to review dimensional data or study the archive. He sat in his room with the door closed and turned his attention fully inward. Drake's presence in the gauntlet had a different quality in these sessions than it did in combat. In combat, Drake was a partner in the immediate, sharing output and occasionally providing tactical observation. In these sessions, Drake was more like a library that occasionally organized its own shelves. The rank A site, Issei said. You've cleared a rank A before. The Nexus. The Nexus was a constructed environment. This is a natural gate that has accumulated power over years of escalation. The entity distribution will be different. How different? The skin shows 4 apex entities rather than the Nexus's single authority. Cooperative apex entities in a natural gate environment are rare in the archive data. They require a specific kind of internal ecology, either cooperative by design or forced cooperative by resource scarcity. Drake was quiet for a moment. You are preparing for the possibility that the 4 apex entities are communicating. Yes. Cooperative apex entities who can communicate will not engage sequentially. They will engage together from the moment they identify you as a threat. I know. Do you want the boost on entry? He considered. The boost, Drake's power doubling capability, was his most significant combat multiplier, but it required active maintenance and produced a heat load that he had to manage during extended engagement. The Nexus fight had used it twice in a targeted way. For cooperative apex entities meant a longer engagement. Graduated, he said. I'll enter clean, let the engagement define the pace, and call for the boost when I have a clear read on the combined apex output. If I call for it, I need sustained rather than burst. Sustained is harder for me. I know. What's your current sustained ceiling? 30 minutes at double output before I need a recovery window. That's enough. If the 4 apexes take more than 30 minutes of boosted output, I'll change approach mid-engagement. You've done that before. Yes. Drake was quiet again, and the warmth in the shared space was the quality that Issei had learned to read as the dragon's equivalent of satisfaction. We are ready, Drake said. Yes, Issei said. On the third day he spent 2 hours with the peerage, not briefing them on the final gate but walking through the hub approach protocol from beginning to end, letting them ask every question they had, and amending the protocol in 3 places based on observations that Kiba and Kaneko made independently. Then he slept for 7 hours, which was the full amount his optimized physiology required. The final gate. The site was in the forest 6 kilometers from Koa's eastern edge, at a point where 3 ridgelines converged and the dimensional fabric had been accumulating gate energy for longer than the archive records covered. The gate membrane was visible to him without the system overlay. It occupied a clearing of perhaps 20 meters diameter and had a color that natural gates did not usually carry, a deep amber verging on copper that meant the internal energy density had reached the upper range of rank A classification. He brought the full shadow force. All 61. The 4 generals in their designated positions, Kage ahead of him, Tetsu at his right, Yumi at his left, Sen in the rear, an orb above him maintaining spatial coherence in the formation. The standard shadows arranged in 3 concentric rings around the command core. The peerage was not with him for this clearance. The hub approach was 48 hours out. He did not want them in a rank A gate the day before the most significant operation they had undertaken together. This decision had produced 30 seconds of silence in the briefing when he stated it, and then Kiba had nodded and everyone else had followed, because they had learned when his reasoning was complete and when it required further examination. He stepped through the membrane. The interior was beautiful in the specific way of very dangerous things, a vast space filled with amber light from no visible source, a floor of geometric crystal that refracted the light into patterns that shifted as he moved, and a ceiling so high that it created its own weather, a low constant movement of amber-tinted cloud that was not water vapor but dimensional material in suspension. The 4 apex entities were aware of him before he was through the membrane. They were gate wardens, a classification the system flagged as rare, entities whose function was the protection of high-value gate sites, whose design implied intent in a way that most gate entities did not. They were roughly humanoid in silhouette but composed of crystallized dimensional energy, amber like the interior light, standing between 4 and 5 meters tall, arranged at the cardinal points of the clearing's interior with a formation precision that confirmed the cooperative intelligence assessment. They did not wait for him to orient. The first strike came from the northern warden, a projectile of compressed dimensional energy the size of a vehicle moving at a speed that required shadow step to avoid. He moved, emerged 2 meters off the entry angle as Serorg had predicted, and immediately corrected laterally because the eastern warden had read the emergence point and was already in motion. For cooperative apex entities in simultaneous engagement was, as Drake had predicted, not a sequential problem. He ran the first 7 minutes on pure output and movement, not attempting decisive engagement, but mapping the 4 wardens' coordination pattern. They communicated. He could see the half-second delay between one warden's action and the adjustments made by the others. The delay was the information he needed. Drake. Ready. Sustained. The boost settled over him like a second gravity, not weight but presence, the doubling of output that made every surface he touched respond as if it were encountering something much larger than it was. He felt his fists drive patterns into the crystalline floor with each step. The air around him heated by 4 degrees. He targeted the coordination gap. The half-second communication delay meant that any warden whose action he could force would create a window in the formation. He drove at the western warden with an output sequence that the warden's structural analysis told him would require a full defensive response, and when the western warden committed to that defense, he redirected at the southern warden during the coordination gap and hit it 3 times at the point where the system identified the crystalline shell's natural fracture geometry. The southern warden cracked at the 3rd strike. The formation changed. 3 wardens operating cooperatively with 1 compromised was a different pattern than 4. He read the new pattern in under 2 minutes and found a second gap. 12 minutes with the boost. The southern warden fell at 14. The eastern warden, whose coordination role had been anchor-relay, lost coherence when the western warden attempted to compensate for both and overextended. He hit the overextended western warden 6 times. At 17 minutes, 2 wardens remained. Drake status. 13 minutes remaining at this output. That's enough. It was. The 2 remaining wardens, without the cooperative structure that had made them formidable as a unit, were each strong but no longer synergistic. He cleared them at 23 minutes and 26 minutes respectively. He stood in the amber interior for a moment, breathing the dimensional air, feeling the regeneration beginning to cycle through the damage distribution across his frame. 4 extractions. 4 warden shadows, crystalline and amber, manifesting in forms that were taller and more geometric than any shadow he had previously extracted. The system classified them as gate warden shadows, which was a new category, and flagged their cooperative communication capability as intact and now redirected through the authority link. The post-clearance signature reading was 31% above baseline. The ring was complete. He stepped back through the membrane into the forest morning. The trees were ordinary. The light was ordinary. The dimensional fabric around him was not. He could feel the hub. Not through the system, not through the shadow relay, but directly. A presence at the center of what he had built, the completed valve network oriented around it, the decompressed fabric creating something that was as close to an open pathway as the architecture was capable of producing. He stood in the clearing for 2 minutes, holding that feeling. Then he took out his communication crystal and called Rias. "Tomorrow," he said when she answered. "Yes," she said. Chapter 21. The night before. What each of them did. Kiba spent the evening cleaning his sword, which was not a sentimental act. He was precise with it. He worked through each section of the blade with the systematic attention of someone who treated the condition of his tools as a direct expression of the quality of his preparation. When he was finished, he went to the small shrine in his room that none of the others had ever asked him about, and he sat there for an hour. He did not pray in any formal sense. He was quiet. Akeno organized her documentation. She had accumulated, without discussing it with anyone, a comprehensive record of the peerage's development over the months, training assessments, gate reconnaissance reports, the raiding game tactical plan, Issei's operational briefings transcribed from memory with a fidelity that would have surprised him if he had seen them. She organized these chronologically, made a clean index, and put the stack in a folder that she placed on her desk where she would see it in the morning. It was not superstition. It was the act of someone who understood that the record of what you had done was the truest evidence of what you were capable of. Kaneko went to the training room and ran through the full physical conditioning sequence she had developed over the past 3 months, working at a pace that was not hurried but that carried in it the quality of someone converting nervous energy into useful work. When she was finished, she went to the kitchen, made herself tea and a late meal, and sat with it at the kitchen table in the dark because she did not turn the light on. In the dark she was more aware of the sounds of the house and the yard beyond it, and the awareness was something she valued without being able to explain why. Asia wrote in the notebook. She had been writing in it for 2 hours before she realized that what she was writing was not operational notes, but something more personal, a record of who each person in the peerage had been when she arrived, and who they were now. She almost stopped when she realized this, because it felt like the kind of thing that was presumptuous, documenting other people's development, as if she were qualified to assess it. But she kept writing, because she was qualified. She had been there for all of it, and the record existed nowhere else. Rias did not sleep. She sat at the window of her room in the Gremory Territory's co-residence, and looked at the city in the dark. She had led peerages. She had led the raiding game preparation. She had led the negotiation with Raynare. She had done all of these things competently, and with the training of a lifetime behind her. Tomorrow she would walk into an unknown dimensional structure that 2 centuries of Underworld research had not been able to access, and the reason it was possible was because of a choice she had made months ago in the rain outside a cemetery. She was not certain she understood what she had chosen. She was certain that she had chosen correctly. The distance between those 2 certainties was the space she sat in. At 0200 she wrote a brief letter to her brother Surzex, which she did not send. She folded it and put it in the desk drawer. Then she went to the kitchen and made tea. Issei ran the final protocol review. He did this standing in the center of his room, the system overlay open, the full operational plan visible in the pale blue architecture of the projection. Entry conditions. Formation. The signal and recognize sequence. Interior unknowns and the decision tree he had built for each projected category of unknown. Force composition. Communication protocols during the approach. Contingency extractions from the hub if the interior contained entities that could be extracted. The escalation criteria that would trigger withdrawal if conditions exceeded operational parameters. He went through each section 3 times. The third pass was not because he needed to review it a third time. It was because the third pass was the point at which he moved from knowing the plan to being the plan, when the protocol ceased to be something he was holding and became something he could act from without reference. At 0300 he put the overlay away and sat on the floor with his back against the foot of the bed. Drake. Here. What do you want from tomorrow? The dragon was quiet for a moment. The warmth in the shared space was steady. I want to see what the hub is, Drake said. I have been in the world for a long time through many hosts, and I have never seen one. Neither has anyone else. No. That is part of what I want. Another pause. And I want to see you do it. Issei held this. Go to sleep, Drake said. You have 4 hours. He slept. Chapter 22, The Approach. 0700. The assembly point was the East Field, which he had used for the Baal spar. He had chosen it for the same reason he had chosen the club room for the Baal meeting. It was his workspace. The peerage arrived between 0652 and 0702, all of them in the operational attire they had developed over the months, each piece of it a choice that represented accumulated experience. He gave a final briefing in 11 minutes. It covered nothing they did not already know. The purpose of a final briefing was not information transfer. It was the shared act of acknowledging the plan before enacting it, a practice that turned individual preparedness into collective commitment. Questions, he said at the end. Kaneko, shadow formation on entry. Standard 3-ring with generals forward. Yes. Akeno, communication protocol if the interior disrupts the shadow relay. Direct verbal. The shadow relay may not function inside the hub architecture. Assume direct verbal as baseline. Asia, the withdrawal criteria. You said conditions exceeding operational parameters. What does that mean in practice? If the interior contains entities that we cannot assess, contain, or disengage from within 60 seconds of contact, I call withdrawal and we exit through the entry point. The entry point will remain stable as long as the ring is intact. She wrote this down. Kiba, if the door opens from within, as the Grail shard suggested, and what is within is not an entity, then we assess and decide. Kiba nodded. He understood this was the most honest answer available. Rias had not asked a question. She stood at the edge of the assembly with her arms at her sides, looking at him with an expression that carried in it everything she had been holding at the window at 0200. He met her gaze and held it for 2 seconds. Ready, he said to her specifically. Ready, she said. He opened the shadow realm and the full force assembled around him. 65 shadows including the 4 gate wardens, the 4 generals, orb maintaining spatial coherence, and the standard force in its formation. The general's presence was different from the standard shadows in a way that the authority link communicated without words. They were not merely extensions of his will but entities with their own versions of combat intelligence, shaped by what they had been before extraction and by what the extraction had made them. He walked toward the hub coordinates. The peerage walked with him. The forest east of Ko was ordinary at 0700, birds, filtered morning light, the smell of damp earth from a rain 3 days past. The dimensional overlay he ran continuously showed the fabric differently, organized, oriented, its natural variability resolved by the ring's completed valve action into a structured pathway that the system mapped in the same pale blue architecture as everything else. They walked 6 kilometers in 40 minutes. The hub became visible to the system 2 kilometers before they reached the boundary, and visible to his direct perception 1 kilometer out. It was not a building. It was not a monument. It was a region of dimensional fabric that had been doing something for so long that the doing had become structural, an area of approximately 100 meters diameter where the ordinary rules of dimensional material were organized into a higher-order coherence that he could feel in the same way he felt the orientation of the ring, but exponentially deeper. At the boundary edge the system produced a notification he had never seen before. System notification, Sovereign Recognition Protocol active. Signal transmission in progress. Awaiting response. He stopped at the boundary and waited. The response took 44 seconds. The dimensional fabric at the hub's center shifted. Not dramatically. A door does not open dramatically when the mechanism works correctly. It opens with the quiet efficiency of a well-made thing doing what it was designed to do. The hub opened. The interior. The interior was not a space in the architectural sense. It was a condition, a zone of dimensional material in a state of organization so complete that the ordinary boundaries between layers ceased to apply. He could see 6 different dimensional layers simultaneously in the system overlay. Their structures merged at this point into a single coherent lattice that the system classified simply as core architecture. It was vast. It was quiet. It was not empty. At the center of the interior was a structure that the system needed 4 seconds to classify, a dimensional matrix the size of a house, composed of the same material as the hub's walls but organized into something that functioned like a machine. Its purpose, as the system's classification finally rendered it, was exactly what the Grail shard had communicated: pressure equilibrium maintenance, the original function of the entire valve network, its central processor, the heart of a system designed to keep the dimensional fabric of the region stable across an indefinitely long operating period. It was running. Slowly, because the conversion damage the invaders had inflicted on the valve network had robbed it of most of its input over decades. It was running on whatever internal reserve it had maintained during that period. But it was running, and beside the matrix, manifesting as a column of light that the system classified as a dimensional construct of indeterminate origin, was the gate speaker. He had not been certain it would be here. The gate speaker's last confirmed communication through the relay had been at the time of Gate 11's clearance. But it was here, and its presence carried the quality it had always carried through the relay, a depth of attention that felt geological. The peerage had stopped at the interior threshold. They were looking at the matrix, the light, the 6-layer architecture visible in every direction. Asia had the notebook open. Akeno stood very still with an expression of genuine wonder that she was not attempting to contain. Kaneko looked at the matrix with the specific quality of attention she gave to things that were mechanically interesting. Kiba's hand was not on his sword but near it, the trained readiness of someone who did not want to draw unnecessarily but would not be caught without access. Rias stood at the threshold and looked at the core architecture with an expression that was the most unguarded he had ever seen on her. He walked to the gate speaker's column of light. The speaker's communication was immediate, not words, the same complex layer transmission the system translated but that always carried more than the translation captured. The surface reading was clear enough. The ring is complete. The matrix can resume full operation. The network is intact. The invaders' conversion was incomplete. They reached 60% of the valve network before they were stopped, but the damage to the remaining 40% was sufficient to degrade the matrix's input to crisis maintenance levels. With the ring restored, the matrix can recover to full function within 6 months of standard operation. He processed this. And the invaders. The primary force that was stopped. What stopped them? The speaker's transmission was slower on this. The imagery it offered was fragmented in a specific way, not because the information was incomplete, but because it was very old. He received the impression of another sovereign, not him, not anyone he had met, a presence of enormous authority that had confronted the invaders at the hub boundary at a time that the system estimated as 4 to 6 centuries ago. The confrontation had stopped the conversion. It had also cost the previous sovereign everything. They are gone, Issei said. The speaker's response was not confirmation or denial. It was more complex, the impression of a legacy, something left in the hub's core architecture by that long-ago sovereign, something that had been waiting for the next sovereign-class presence to arrive and complete what had been interrupted. He looked at the matrix. What is the legacy? The speaker indicated the matrix's central point with a quality that was the closest thing to urgency he had ever received from it. He walked to the matrix. The legacy. The matrix's surface was warm. Not physically warm, the dimensional material had no temperature in the conventional sense, but warm in the way the Grail shard's presence was warm, which was a quality of something very old that had been waiting and was now less alone. He placed his hand against it. The system produced a notification cascade that occupied his entire overlay for 3 seconds, more simultaneous information than it had ever generated at once, and then it organized itself into a single classified entry that was labeled with a designation he had not seen before. Sovereign inheritance detected. Prior sovereign encoding, active. Contents, dimensional architecture blueprint, complete. Network expansion protocol, complete. Defense array specifications, complete. Personal encoding, warning, this encoding contains a direct message from the prior sovereign. Accept inheritance? He accepted. The architectural data transferred instantly. It was enormous, a complete technical understanding of the dimensional valve system, not just the 16 gates of the co-ring but the full network across a geographic range that the system's updated map now showed extending several hundred kilometers in every direction, hundreds of gates and dozens of rings serving pressure hub installations across a region he had not known was unified. Ko was not the only hub. It was the most damaged. And it was, because of what he was, the one that had been repaired. The defense array specifications were a category he did not have time to fully process in the moment, a set of protocols for the hub's active defensive function, which the matrix could generate when operating at full capacity. Not weapons. Dimensional stabilizers powerful enough to resist force gate intrusion across the entire valve network. And then the personal encoding. It came as voice. Not through the system's translation layer but directly, a voice that was simply present in his awareness without a medium, the voice of someone who had made a message and trusted that whoever received it would be the right person to receive it. The voice said, "You found it. Good. What I could not finish. The network will help you. The hubs are alive in the way that very old, very patient things are alive. They remember. And the invaders were not defeated. They retreated. They are patient too. Do not let their patience exceed yours." Then the encoding ended. He stood with his hand on the matrix for a long time after. Behind him he could hear the peerage. They had not spoken since he walked to the matrix. They were waiting, which was what the peerage did when he needed the space to process. He took the space. Then he turned around. Chapter 23. What the inheritance means. Inside the hub. He told them what the inheritance contained. He did this standing in the core architecture with the dimensional lattice visible in every direction, which gave the briefing a quality that no tactical room had ever had. The subject and the setting were the same thing. He told them about the network map. He projected it through the shadow relay in a form that orb held stable as a visible display, and they looked at the scale of it. Hundreds of gates, dozens of hubs, a system that covered the geographic range of a small country. Most of the gates were in various states of escalation, because the network had been operating without clearance for the period of its degradation. The map showed them not as a finished picture but as a workload. He told them about the prior sovereign. He gave them what the encoding had provided, which was not much in terms of personal detail but was specific and clear in terms of what had happened. The previous holder of this authority had stopped the conversion at great cost and had left what they could in the expectation that another would come. He told them about the invaders. Their patience. The implication that the retreat had been tactical rather than permanent. When he finished, Kaneko said, "How long?" The prior sovereign stopped them 4 to 6 centuries ago. The retreat has lasted that long. So they could come back in a century, or they could be planning their return right now. Yes. Kaneko absorbed this. Then we work faster than they plan. Kiba looked at the network map. The other hubs. Will they require sovereign presence to operate, or is Koa's recovery enough to begin restoring the wider network? The architecture data suggests that Koa's recovery will generate a cascade stabilization across adjacent hub sites, because the network is designed to be self-reinforcing. The adjacent hubs should begin drawing pressure maintenance input from the Koa matrix as it recovers capacity. He paused. The damaged hubs, the ones where the conversion reached further than 60%, may need direct intervention. How many? Akeno said. 7 in the expanded map. 7 hubs where the conversion damage is severe enough that cascade stabilization may not be sufficient. 7 Nexus-scale operations, Rias said. Not exactly. The hubs are not Nexus sites. The clearance requirements will depend on the damage state and the entity accumulation inside each one. Some may be simpler. Some may not. Rias looked at him. Her expression was the composed one that she wore when she was absorbing something that required recalibration. The 72 pillars will want to know about this. Yes. I'll contact Serorg when we're out of the hub. The quarterly exchange is the formal channel, but this exceeds quarterly exchange scope. My father too, she said. Yes. Asia had been writing steadily. She looked up. The defense array. You said the matrix can generate stabilizers that prevent forced gate intrusion. If it recovers to full capacity in 6 months, does that mean the Koa zone is protected from forced intrusion in 6 months? That is what the specifications indicate. And the other hubs, when their recovery completes, the same. The defense function was the network's secondary purpose, after pressure maintenance. The invaders disabled it first, because they needed the gates accessible for the conversion work. He looked at the map. Restoring the defense function across the full network is the endpoint of what the prior sovereign started. That is, Kiba said slowly, an enormous project. Yes. Then we begin, Kaneko said. She said it with the same matter-of-fact quality she applied to everything, which made it sound like the most reasonable statement in the room. He looked at each of them. Yes, he said. What the system said at level 30? The level 30 notification arrived inside the hub, which meant the sovereign inheritance had counted as a clearance event. He looked at it and read the stat update and the new unlocks, which included a capability the system labeled network site. The ability to perceive the dimensional status of any gate or hub site in the full inherited network at will, without relay. He ran network site for the first time standing in the core architecture with the peerage around him. The sensation was difficult to describe later. It was not like the system overlay, which was a projected display. It was more like becoming temporarily aware of something that was always there but not normally perceptible, the dimensional fabric of several hundred kilometers of geography. Every gate and hub within it registering as a distinct point of presence in his awareness. Some strong, some faint, some actively pressurized, some quiet. He could feel, distantly, the damaged hubs. They had a quality of long-sustained effort under inadequate conditions that was the closest thing the dimensional fabric communicated to something like exhaustion. He closed network sight after 30 seconds. The scale of the perception was manageable for short periods. For long periods he would need to develop a filtering protocol, the same way he had developed a filtering protocol for the Shadow Authority link when the number of shadows had grown past 20. Level 30, Drake said. Yes. And the new unlock. Network sight. I can perceive the full inherited network at will. Drake was quiet for a moment. You have become the network's caretaker, the dragon said. That is what the prior sovereign left. Not just the architectural data. The role itself. Issei considered this. Yes. How does that feel? Like a very long project, he said. With a good team. The dragon's warmth and the shared space had the quality he had learned, over months, to read as something close to pride. It was not a sentiment Drake expressed often. When it appeared he did not comment on it. He walked back to the peerage. We exit and debrief, he said. I need 4 hours with the architecture data before I can give you a full timeline for Phase 2. Phase 2, Kiba said. The 7 damaged hubs. And everything that comes after. They walked out of the hub together, back through the open dimensional boundary, into the ordinary forest where the morning light was now mid-morning and the birds were still doing what birds do, entirely unaware of what had just been resolved 40 meters from where they sang. Chapter 24. The Weight of Sovereignty. The Debrief. They ran the debrief in the club room at 1400, which gave him 4 hours with the architecture data and gave the peerage time to eat a proper lunch and process the morning without direction from him. He had learned that the gap between an operation and the formal debrief was not wasted time. It was the interval in which things that people had been holding during the operation came to the surface, and surface-level processing made the debrief more honest. He used the 4 hours to build a Phase 2 operational framework. The 7 damaged hubs were distributed across the network map in a geographic pattern that suggested the invaders had targeted the most structurally critical sites first, the ones whose degradation would produce the most destabilizing effect on the network as a whole. This was logical. It was also useful information, because it meant the 7 damaged hubs were the most interconnected points in the system, and repairing them in the right sequence would produce the fastest overall recovery. He identified the optimal repair sequence using the architecture data's interconnection model, Hub 3 in the northern mountain range first, because its recovery would provide the most immediate cascade benefit to the 4 hubs in its adjacency cluster. Hub 7 in the coastal zone second, for similar reasons. The remaining 5 in an order determined by cascade efficiency. He wrote this up in 12 pages and printed it through the clubroom's printer, which was an ordinary piece of office equipment that had somehow survived months of use by a supernatural peerage without incident. At 1400 the peerage filed in. He distributed the 12 pages and waited 8 minutes. Hub 3, Kiba said. Northern Mountain Range. Travel time from Ko. Approximately 5 hours through conventional transport. I'm assessing gate-enabled transit through the Shadow Realm as an alternative. The architecture data includes dimensional transit protocols that the prior sovereign used for rapid network traversal. I haven't tested them yet. Timeline before we can test them, Akeno said. 2 weeks of controlled testing. The protocols are technically complete but practically untested by me. I won't use an untested transit method for an operational movement. 2 weeks, she noted. Hub 3's scan from network site shows a rank A gate network around the hub site. 6 gates in a partial ring, approximately 40% complete. The invaders got further there before they were stopped. He looked at the map. Pre-existing clearance of 4 gates will reduce the ring completion workload. The remaining gates are unknown rank until direct scan. Kaneko had been through the 12 pages twice. She held up page 7. The invaders. The prior sovereign's encoding said they're patient. The defense array fully operational across the complete network is the endpoint that removes their window. How long to full network restoration? He had calculated this. Optimistic estimate, 2 years. Realistic estimate, 3 to 4 years. The timeline is a function of gate clearance rate, hub recovery speed, and whether any of the 7 damaged hubs require intervention beyond the clearancian signal method used here. 3 to 4 years, Rias said. Yes. She looked at the map. We were in school 8 months ago. Yes. Something passed through her expression that was not quite a smile, and was not quite anything else. Then we should probably talk to the school about an extended project schedule. He looked at her. She met his gaze with the expression he had least expected from her at the beginning and had come to find most characteristic, the one where she was being genuinely wry. I'll add it to the agenda, he said. Serorg's response. The communication to Serorg went through the formal crystal channel at 1700. He wrote it in the pillar convention with the careful precision of someone who had learned the formal language specifically for situations where the content required the credibility of correct form. He told Serorg what the hub contained, what the inheritance had provided, and what the 7 damaged hubs meant for the broader dimensional stability of the region. He told him about the prior sovereign. He told him about the invader's patience. Serorg's response came at 1823. It was brief for the scale of what it was addressing, which was itself a kind of statement about Serorg's nature. It said, understood. I will convene an emergency advisory session of the Pillar Assembly and present this as a matter of dimensional infrastructure, not politics. The 72 pillars have historians who have documented dimensional instability events for centuries. I believe they will recognize what you have found. What do you need from us? He considered the question carefully before he answered. He wrote back, access to the historian's records on dimensional instability events. Names of any gates in the pillar territories that appear in my network map, flagged for coordination purposes. Standing agreement that gate clearance operations conducted for network restoration are recognized as infrastructure work under the provisional sovereignty classification and not as territorial incursion. And a mutual notification protocol if the historian's records contain anything that suggests the invader's timeline. Serorg's reply came in 20 minutes, agreed on all 4. Send me the network map. I'll cross-reference against the historian's records myself before the assembly session. He sent the map. Then he sat with the correspondence for a moment. Serorg Bale was going to present a case to the most powerful political body in the Devil World on behalf of a human heritage independent sovereign operating out of a high school club room. This was, objectively, an unusual situation. He filed this under relevant context, and moved to the next item. What Rias said on the roof. He had taken to working on the clubroom roof when he needed open sky thinking, which was a habit that had developed without conscious intention and that he had kept because it was useful. The roof had a section of flat surface large enough to sit on and a view of the coast skyline that was, in the evening, quietly worth looking at. Rias found him there at 1930. She had the directional quality of someone who knew where he would be. She sat near him without asking and looked at the same skyline. They were quiet for a while. The prior sovereign, she said eventually. They stopped the conversion alone. That's what the encoding indicated. And you have us. Yes. She was quiet for another moment. The coal lights were coming on across the valley, the ordinary city doing its ordinary evening. I want to say something that is not diplomatic and not strategic, she said. Then say it. She looked at him. What you did today matters. Not the classification. Not the political structure. The thing itself, what you built to get here, starting from a cemetery and a system notification and a first extraction named Kage, matters. And the prior sovereign was right to trust that someone would come. He held this. He gave it the full weight it was offered with. Thank you, he said. It was not a dismissal. She heard it correctly, the full acknowledgement of someone who does not deflect when something real is given. She nodded and looked back at the city. 3 to 4 years, she said. Yes. That's a long time to be a peerage. Yes. Good, she said. She said it with the quiet certainty of a decision that had been made at the window at 0200 and confirmed in the core architecture, and did not require any further deliberation. He looked at the coast skyline. Somewhere in the network he could now perceive without trying, 65 shadows maintained their formations, orb tracked spatial coherence, and the co-hub matrix ran its slow recovery toward full capacity. 7 damaged hubs waited in their distributed positions across the network, each one a problem with a solution that was now achievable. The invaders were patient. He was leveling up. The distance between those two facts was the space in which 3 to 4 years of work would happen, and the work would be done by the team he had assembled and the authority he carried and the inheritance he had accepted from someone whose name he did not know but whose purpose he understood completely. He sat on the roof of the club room in the ordinary evening of a high school in a city that did not know it was the repaired heart of a dimensional network that had been quietly holding the fabric of the world together for longer than recorded history, and he thought about what came next. Kage's presence pulsed in the shadow relay, perimeter nominal, all stations holding. He acknowledged it. Then he pulled up the Phase 2 framework and began writing the Hub 3 approach protocol. There was work to do. End of Act 3. The Weight of Sovereignty. The Shadow Sovereign of Ko continues in Act 4.